I was paralyzed with fear, looking out the window. I had a teeny little bedroom, and looking at me through the window was one of those guys. This is something that I know based on what occurred with me. We are powerless to prevent abductions from happening. Part of the cover-up, the deepest part of the cover-up, is the strong evidence of human mutilation.
He was connecting with abductees and removing implants from them?
Yes, 19 of them. There was no scar tissue. And that is the most compelling thing of all. Never mind the metallurgical analysis of it. I think the NHI have probably already shut down all of our nukes. It is most likely that they are trying to be overt and send us the message that we are kids playing with matchsticks. Multiple species standing on stages around the globe, in every country, every big city. People can walk up and touch them. That's what disclosure looks like to me.
I think it's a critical part of your story, is the experiences that you've had, because a lot of people want to have experience. As terrifying as they are, a lot of people want to experience that and want to, understand what it's like, but you've had that. So if you could, let's start off with the first one. You're 5 years old. What happened?
Terrifying nightmares that, I would complain to my folks, and I was, paralyzed with fear, looking out the window. I had a teeny little bedroom. You could probably fit 3 of my bedrooms here in your studio, teeny little bedroom. And, but I had 2 sisters, so I had my own little space. And looking at me through the window was one of those guys. But I gotta say, I have no fear, no physiological response to him or her. I'm looking for genitalia.
I know.
That's one of the things, right?
He was facing the camera earlier when I first sat him up there, and it was like full frontal. It
Yeah,
was,
you gotta be careful with
we
that.
had to shift him a little bit. It was uncomfortable for just sitting here.
Ooh, now I gotta button up here.
Yeah. So did it look just like him? Was it like?
Yeah, but
What'd you see, I guess?
So this is what's really fascinating. That's not scary to me because of the eyes.
Okay.
Those eyes are round. And the scary guys for me had the almond-shaped eyes. So you wouldn't think that would be a big difference, right? But it's huge. And there are certain times where a particular face with the right alignment, and I didn't realize this until, studying the cogneural world of how minor details in the face. So you have in your brain, we all have a fusiform face area is what we call it, and it lights up really intensively when you're trying to recognize other faces. So what caused fear in me was the size of them, much larger relative to their head than this guy, and the angular shape going kind of on an angle up. And so I told Ross the story of being paralyzed, much later in 1996, 1995, 96 timeframe, and I saw the Whitley Strieber book, and it paralyzed me. I stopped in the middle of the store. I was walking with my daughter at the time, and what pulled me out of that paralyzed state was she had come back, and she's like, "Dad, come on, we're going to be late." And it wasn't until she came back that it shook me out of that. And then I came back. I made some excuse with my wife. She was taking our daughters to go, shop for clothes and get ready for school. So I went straight back to the bookstore. I'll link up with you later. And I went and bought the book right away, ripped the cover off before I even left the store. And so it was that level of fear with that face. But this guy's got round eyes, and they don't wrap around the side of the head. So it's subtle little differences like that.
Were they black? Were they the same color?
Oh yeah. And so that was another aspect of it that my parents couldn't resolve, was that I was a relatively fearless kid in a lot of ways, but not when it came to deer, horses, squirrels, because the solid black eye with no iris. And it was just terrifying. I would stop in my tracks. I would be paralyzed. And so I remember, I think I overheard them one time, we had this little paper thin little doors. And so you could still hear some of the conversation. They think they're not being heard, but they are. And they're like, why is he so, what kind of kid is afraid of Bambi, for crying out loud, right? And so it was just, that
conversation was after you started to see this.
Yeah. Well, and one of the many conversations they had trying to deal with my nightmares, where I would end up in their room, screaming and crying about the spacemen are coming to get me, which is another interesting aspect of it, right? Because, you had all the B movies, the black and white B movies. I know I really dated myself right there, but you had the creature from the Black Lagoon and all these terrifying movies, and they didn't scare me in the slightest. It was the dark eyes that scared the bejesus out of me.
So how many times did you see this?
I really don't know. It's I would say anywhere from 5 to 15,
wow,
maybe even 20.
Wow.
And so what's interesting about it is, so my dad was teaching at MIT and working at Draper Laboratories downtown Boston, Cambridge. My mom was teaching at Northeastern University. She was on a satellite campus out near Burlington, but she had to go downtown sometimes. And so their getaway was up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. So I think, before I became an Eagle Scout, I had already climbed Mount Washington like 5 times. And that's a death-defying mountain. I remember looking on the way up, and he had showed us there were 54 deaths on that mountain. And this was in, 1969, as we were climbing up. So we had spent a lot of time up there. And I had a couple of other, really anomalous experiences up there, terrifying, sorts of things. I remember driving home, so we would go up like Friday afternoon, camp out Friday night, camp out Saturday night. Every now and then we would climb up into the presidential range. So it's not just Mount Washington, you have Mount Adams, Mount Jefferson, so there's the presidential range up there. And once you get up there, it's kind of nice to knock out 3 or 4 of them, before you come back. So that there was this hut up there called the Lake of the Clouds hut, and it's it's huge nowadays. But every now and then we'd spend a night there and climb another mountain or 2 or 3, and then come home late on Sunday. And we were coming back through Franconia Notch, and there was this little resort called the Jack-O-Lantern Resort. It's still there. I took my wife up there a couple of weeks ago, and we stopped by it. And I remember the big black eyes on the Jack-O-Lantern on top of that little motel, and same thing. I'm just getting, this is how I kind of know it's a real memory instead of a false or fuzzy memory, is when you have that physiological response. So I probably got a little bit of sweat going down the back of my back right now. The hair's standing up on my arms here. So absolutely terrifying. And again, the jack-o'-lantern, yeah, there you go. There it is. But see the white shadowing on those eyes there, Matt? So that takes all the fear away from me. So if you had put a classic ET face, if you put the communion face over that jack-o'-lantern, that would scare the bejesus out of me. And I would, a lot of times it's like paralytic, right? Not not in terms of sleep paralysis. You know, that is a misnomer that a lot of people try to misapply. You know, sleep paralysis is a situation where in stage 4 sleep, REM sleep, real deep, if you get woken up too quickly instead of naturally and allow yourself to back out of those sleep stages. So as we sleep, we go, you know, from awake down through several stages, 4 stages typically, and then you come back up and you go through that cycle 3 or 4 times over the course of the evening. So if it's by luck of the draw or by some anomalous situation, an abnormal sound in the background, you know, a backfire on a car or whatever, and you're in stage 4, REM sleep, your body has, your brain has some neurotransmitters in there that prevent you from moving around. And so what you try to do, like an athlete does, you try to rehearse what has occurred during the day. So athletes, you go through the drills in your head. So this is well known in sports literature that you can really help your game out by practicing it, and just without even moving, you go through the motions. So that's what sleep paralysis is. It's very simple, but it only lasts a few seconds. At the longest, maybe a minute. So what has occurred over the years, especially since ancient times and the times of fairies and so forth, since fairies don't exist, ETs don't exist, this has been misattributed in the literature to sleep paralysis. Look, sleep paralysis doesn't last 5 days with Travis Walton. Doesn't last 5 hours for me, blah, blah, blah. So for me, in reliving it when you have a prompt like that, the jack-o'-lantern, that's paralytic for a little bit, but the terror subsides. This is how we have become resilient as a species over time. We finally are able to deal with, so that little bit of paralytic injection of that neurotransmitter fades pretty quick.
So I got to ask, of course, is there anything that you could have been exposed to prior to age 5, like a movie or anything,
Yeah.
or like what, any of that?
That is really insightful of you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, what, 50 years later, half a century later, and I'm studying cognitive psychology, cognitive science across the board, and I attributed, like, I swallowed the hook that the rest of the world is with this stigma, and I figured, well, it must just have been movies or science fiction stuff that I saw. So I watched science fiction like every kid on our block, right? But this is what I did. Matter of fact, I think it was after my interview with Ross, and I constantly go back and forth, you know, from science to speculation, and you know, it's almost like a sine wave. It's probably a little more erratic than that. And so I did my own little research project, and I went back and through the wonderful magic of the internet, but not just the internet, you know, libraries, and I went back to try to find those guys in the late 50s, early 60s, and they're not there. I could not find a single episode in the original Star Trek, you know, with William Shatner, where you had one of those guys. They're not there. And then Lost in Space, that I also saw in black and white. And so part of that generation is that we were the generation that transitioned from black and white television to color television. So it's kind of cool. And so Lost in Space was one of those that bridged that gap. So there were early episodes that were black and white. And all of the aliens in both of those were laughable to me. Nothing was scary in the slightest. And then you look at those.
Right.
Excellent job, Ryan. Look at that. So that's what I did. So I have a bunch of those and then a bunch of other ones. There's some where, you know, you have a good-looking gal in a silver outfit, kind of like hers, but she has little spikes coming out of her head. And so they're all just laughable.
Sure.
There's nothing scary about that at all. And there's no praying mantis guys either. So I
Right.
could never find a little gray guy. I could never find a praying mantis guy in anything when I was growing up. So this is how science works, right? You come up with a hypothesis, the null hypothesis, you assume the opposite, and then you try to find evidence for that. So my null hypothesis is not valid. I couldn't find any of them. So now I got to look back at these childhood dreams. Here we go again. And now I'm thinking, maybe they were real. Maybe there was something to that.
Were you frozen at the time when you were looking at these, or were you able to move?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess to take that a step further, I was definitely frozen, and but I could move my eyes, back and forth. And I now know this, from going through the invisible grad school. So Jacques Vallée talks about the invisible college, and I would argue that I was in the invisible college while I was in college, because while I was at West Point and long after that, through a lot of the military, we spent a lot of time doing boring stuff. I think you talked with Mario about that. I just talked with Terry Lovelace about that recently. And so a lot of the other guys on sentry duty or during those boring times, they're reading Playboy magazine, right? Or comic books or other books. A lot of, especially officers are reading military history. I'm reading Jacques Vallée. I'm reading J. Allen Hynek. I'm reading Stanton Friedman. I'm reading Kathy Martin's books. And so when you look at that literature, it is really, really common for folks that are reporting on their abduction experiences to be paralyzed with the exception of their eyes. And it always puzzled me.
I had an experience like that.
Did you really?
Yeah.
But you could still move your eyes.
Could still move my eyes.
Oh, you got to tell me more about that.
Yeah,
So
I'm laying in bed. I was probably, it's hard to even, I think I was in my late 20s probably.
Okay.
And laying in bed and felt like I was awake. My eyes were open. I was looking around the room and I see this black mist behind the bed. And
mist?
It's like this black smoky stuff, and it just started to climb the wall. And it went up onto the ceiling, and I was just frozen, just freaking out, and looking all over the room, but couldn't move. And eventually, it just, it covered the entire ceiling, and
wow!
I'm just sitting there looking at it.
Was that here? Was that in Florida?
I was in Bradenton, yeah.
In Bradenton,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was at not the current house that I'm in actually, but 2 houses ago, but. I still don't have a good explanation for it, for what happened. It was the only time in my life that I've had what you might call sleep paralysis or whatever you would, I don't know if it was or if it wasn't, but I couldn't move. And the only thing that could move was my eyes. And I don't even think that I wanted to move, it felt like I was just deeply connected to the ether, it just felt like I was just being weighted down by something, almost like a heavy blanket or something.
Yeah.
And I probably could have broken out of it if I wanted to, but I was like, what the hell's going on here? Kind of a thing. So
yeah, that's fascinating.
It was very strange. Yeah.
And so that's what begs the question that is still replete throughout the literature. So that's fairly common. And so it begs two things. And that's what science is all about. The question that results in 100 other questions. So do you think that you were paralyzing yourself, or that there was an external? I
don't know, man.
And that's what that's how I was going to answer that if you had gone down that road with me. Is I don't know if that was me doing it out of the fight or flight situation, because that's really common. It's not just in humans. Other animals. Look at prey animals in particular. Do that, right? The first thing a deer does is freeze. And it makes sense when you go through the biology and evolution of prey versus predator animals. The prey animals immediately freeze because the predator is looking for movement. And so if you're in a herd and you're the last one to freeze, bro, you're going down. They're going to take you out.
Right, right.
And so part of having those big black eyes for horses, deer, and squirrels, those are all prey animals, right? Is they really need that huge field of view so that they can freeze first. And maybe somebody else gets taken, or maybe even another species gets grabbed by the hunter. So I still don't know to this date. You know, I'm in the same boat as you.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was freezing myself out of fear or whether it was some external entity that was paralyzing me, and that's what was causing the fear. So I want to shout out to Michael Masters, Michael P. Masters, Dr. Michael P. Masters, and his extratemporal theory, which is fascinating to me because he builds a very compelling case, I think, that these guys could be future humans. When you look at that, right, and that structure.
It's very compelling.
It's very compelling, and one of the most compelling parts of it for me was when he linked the evolutionary development of the brain with the eyes, the bigger brain and the eyes. So those two organs are linked like no other organs are. There's no other organ in your that is linked to your brain like the eyes are. We are very visual creatures. You know, I used to use my fist as a model of the brain, you know, the human brain. So this is kind of the motor control area of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex right up there where your executive functions are. And your watch, I would have my cadets turn their watch around. This is your cerebellum. So we'd play that a little bit. And what is really important is I would take them and have them go like this. So the back of your head is your V1 visual processing area. That's why, you know, in sports, you see stars when you take a hard punch, if you're boxing, kickboxing, whatever. And so what's happening is there's a counter coup in your head. Your gray matter is sloshing back and forward, and it smacks against the back of your brain or your skull, and that's what causes those stars. So the first step.
Been there.
Yeah, you know that. Yeah, you can relate to that,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so one of the first things you do when you meditate is you close your eyes. So you're just trying to quiet things down, and also it's a key aspect of hypnosis. The Spiegel eye roll test that David Spiegel, I can't remember if it was dad or him. They're out of Stanford, world-renowned, magnificent psychologists, and they have really delved into the psychiatry of hypnosis and using it. David, I think, came up with the Reverie app that has helped so many people in resolve trauma and anxiety and so forth. And one of the first steps in that is just close your eyes and calm yourself, right? So we're such visual creatures. So Michael gives a wonderful case for that evolutionary aspect. So I think it's beyond just possible. It is probable that those guys are coming back. But
there's some options. There's some possibilities for what it is. I feel like biological robots or you know, I mean, like creations, like some I don't know if it was one of my guests. I think it might have been Timothy Alberino mentioned that he talked to some abductees who were on ships and that they saw the mantis that you saw and that there were a ton of these little guys, but he got the sense that they were like biological robots that were reporting up to the mantis beings and that they were just kind of their worker bees, you know.
Yeah.
And I think Mario mentioned something else about being on the ship and saying that he, through hypnosis, he saw just hundreds of these out just working and doing various things while he was there. So, yeah, it's interesting, like future humans versus, they're biological, I guess, if you believe what some of the crash retrievals and you see, you know, human remains, or biologics, not human, but but biologic remains have been found, and sometimes they've been, broken up, and just the bodies have been destroyed. But it looks like they were biological living beings from some of these eyewitness, crash retrieval things. So I don't know, man. There's a lot of possibilities as to what they are.
Yeah. And I love how Dave Grush used that term. He is such a brilliant guy. And they tried, during his testimony, and many times since then, people try to pigeonhole him into a canyon, and he is so intellectually agile. And so he came up with that term, biologics, right? There were biological stuff in there. That's the best he can. So he doesn't weigh in either way.
Non-human biologics, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it could be a mix. You could have the cloned robots, biological robots, mixed in with the other folks. I know Terry mentioned that, and I think Mario mentioned that too, that there was a delineation even between the gray guys. A couple that are a little bit higher, a little taller, and that they were actually sentient beings versus the little clone guys. So they look very similar, but there's a hierarchy there, right? And so that is totally consistent in my perspective with Michael's extratemporal, which is a brilliant way to use the same letters, E.T., right? That was brilliant. So he's just as agile as Dave, and I would love to be in the room when those two guys can talking.
Yeah, same.
But in any case, but what that doesn't address is the 33 other species that Richard Dolan has in his book that he has accumulated over his many historical reviews, very well done, very well researched historical reviews of this subject. 34 different, and that's by no means exhaustive. To kind of close this out, the multi-species aspect of this, I vehemently, vigorously agree with that extratemporal hypothesis for them. But it doesn't explain the mantis guys, all the other weird, I call them the scarecrows, the from Pascagoula, the guys with the lobster claw hands and the carrots sticking out of their noses and so forth that Charlie Hickson and the Pascagoula incident. So lots of variety in that.
What have you seen personally? So you've seen these guys and you've seen the mantis is what I'm aware of. But what was the experience like with the mantis?
Yeah. So just like my childhood experiences, I was still in the common perspective of the rest of society at that time that all aliens were these guys. And so...
And about how old were you?
That was 1995, so let me see, I was born in 59, so, I'm in my 30s. Yeah, and what I can't recall right now is whether or not that incident where I saw Whitley's book and froze, whether or not that was before or after that mountain bike ride. It was right around the same time. It was that very interesting summer after the Oklahoma City bombing. I do distinctly remember that it was after the Oklahoma City bombing because when I was doing that bike ride, I remember telling the cattle I'd become a vegetarian because of some of my own trauma from entering the Murrah building, the day after Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bombing, seeing the lady in purple dress, just that color right there, up, she was impaled up in the rafters. It was horrible. Anyway, so I'd gone vegetarian after that because of the smell and just the appearance of like taco meat. And I don't want to go too much further. I don't want to trigger any of your audience, but it was pretty horrific. So I remember riding along and seeing these cows out in the pasture, and I'm like, "Hey guys, you don't got to worry about me. I'm not eating you." And so it was right around that time, and the whole mantis thing was so shocking to me, from a stigma perspective, from an ontological, what John Mack would call my worldview, that it couldn't be real. There's no way that that first of all, taller than me, right? Whereas all these guys have been shorter than me. And it had big eyes, but it didn't look humanoid. It looked insectish. And so it had to be fake. It had to be something that I came up with on my own. I had not at that point I don't think I was in the Invisible graduate school at that point. I was in the Invisible college. So I hadn't gone into the more recent, publications that had talked about mantis. So I think I might have come across one or two cases in the literature that had talked about the mantis. And I think while I was reading it, I was just like the rest of society. That's all BS. So these other 10 chapters, yeah, they're good because they're talking about these guys. But that chapter about the mantis thing, I'm going to dismiss that and go on to the next chapter, right? I read through it, but, I didn't believe it. So it wasn't until much later that I became aware that there are plenty of reports of people interacting with these big mantis guys. You seem very familiar with that.
Yeah, very familiar. Yeah, I mean, Timothy Alberino kind of educated me on it a little bit, and some of the experiences that people have had. And then I think the guys in Las Vegas, which the family of people that there was that big, looked like a meteor-looking thing streaming down, and then they called the police and said, "We've got these 8-foot guys in our backyard." I'm almost positive those were mantis.
I think you're right. Yeah. And I remember the cops because the ball, whatever it was, came like across their field of view,
right,
and crashed in their
yard.
And
that seems to be a very credible case.
I agree.
Would love to get that 16-year-old kid on the show. Maybe he's 17 now, but I mean, he's talked about it publicly. The family's talked about it publicly. There doesn't seem to be anybody that has been able to debunk it. The cops showed up; they were freaking out. I mean, it seems like a legitimate case. And
it seemed pretty compelling to me.
Yeah. So that's got to add some kind of it's got to make you feel better about your experience to have stuff like that actually, kind of.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah,
there you go.
Well done, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, again, it's tough to make that out.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like the whole phenomenon. You never get you never get a perfect video, but. Yeah, I mean, I think they said that the thing came into their house and that a cross on the wall, that it actually went invisible and that a cross on the wall was turned upside down and was kind of like floating in the room as if it was carrying it, and then it threw it across the wall, like across the house. So, yeah, it's a crazy, crazy experience.
I love what you just said, that it went invisible, because part of the skeptics world loves to use, the Fermi paradox, which I got to haul the BS flag up on. I mean, I have all the respect in the world, the respect in the world for Dr. Fermi, but, it is such an arrogant perspective to take that if there is a galactic society out there, where are they? That's what the question that Fermi posed. Why don't they land on the White House lawn, right?
Well, Musk has quoted that too, and Musk is a bright guy. It's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's discounting millions of people's experiences and sightings and of the phenomenon. It's like that just doesn't exist, So, it doesn't make any sense. I'm with you, but
I agree, and it comes from a place of arrogance, because it assumes that they think we're worthy of that. If you're to use Gary Nolan's analogy of the angry monkeys, why would I expose myself to a bunch of angry monkeys? Why would I land in the middle of all that anger, of all that aggression? Why wouldn't I pick someplace that has been neutral through multiple wars. The less angry monkeys. Why wouldn't I land in the middle of Switzerland and maybe seek out this poor farmer like Edward Meyer, Billy Meyer? So there's something there that, from the logic of it, that makes a little more sense. But I want to, I go into this in my book about the need to be deceptive sometimes to do behavioral research. And this is what a lot of the world just doesn't understand. And I didn't understand until I was running my own human subjects, human participant experiments. Because if you want to study a species in their natural environment, you got to conceal yourself. I don't want to. Jane Goodall was obviously a brilliant scientist and wonderful, but her approach was absolutely flawed in terms of analyzing the behavior of those primates that she was studying, because she exposed herself to them. What makes the most sense is to have a duck blind. If you're going to be studying wolves, you better be able to run as fast as a wolf, and you don't want the wolves to detect you. So even a duck blind isn't good enough. That's why hunters got to spray themselves with urine, right? You don't want to be detected olfactorily, visually, in any way, shape, or form. So it makes sense that many of these, not all, many of these folks, the scientist versions of these folks, this galactic society, would be deceptive, or at least, maybe not deceptive, but maybe they would camouflage themselves. So it makes all the sense in the world that they would come with an ability to disappear and be able to turn that on and off. So let's say, for example, these guys that landed in Vegas, they're studying the angry monkeys, but something goes wrong with the spaceship or their craft, whatever it is, or their interdimensional hopper, whatever it is. And I want to put that to rest as well. Look, if you can travel faster than light, if you can bend space-time, if you can bend space, by Einstein, you can bend time as well. So you are inherently a time traveler. It comes with the territory. And you can skip across dimensions. Just all three of those are interconnected. So it's not either or. Just like with the big species thing, it's not either or. It's all the above. In any case, there's a strong case to be made that if you can warp, if you have enough power to warp that fabric of space, then you can redirect photons, light packets around you, and be invisible as well. It comes with it. So those beings going in and out of visibility make all the sense in the world. And you would want that if you were going to study the angry monkeys without upsetting them. Now,
if you want to survive,
right?
Invisibility would be key.
But that's only for the scientist agenda. For those of us who may be trying to, or those of them who may be trying to influence us, then they may want to be overt, like with the Tic-Tac, like with all of the exercises that Ryan Graves talked about, on the other coast, right? So you had left coast, right coast, west coast, east coast, incursion on both of those, not to mention all of the nuclear stuff. Clearly, the nuclear incursions, as Robert Hastings talks about in his phenomenal book, as Bob Jacobs talks about, Terry Mario, and also Jeff Goodrich all talk about, is that those were overt. And it is, the general consensus, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but from what I've gleaned from interactions with these folks, as well as reading not just Robert's book, but others who have written about the UFO nuke relationship, it is most likely that they are trying to be overt and send us the message that we are kids playing with matchsticks. I have a chapter called Nuclear Matchsticks. And it's like, wake the hell up. You don't realize the magnitude of the consequences of what you're doing. You could, just like the matches in the backyard, you could not only burn down our house, but the entire neighborhood if the winds are right. And how do we know that those detonations, at the subatomic level, that's not disrupting the other dimensions where maybe there's other folks in those dimensions that you're killing? We don't know that. We don't know enough about that. And so it's like we're children in the galactic society that...
Angry monkey children.
Yeah, there you go. That's what a great phrase. You just combined all three of those in one. Well done, Matt. So you need to be overt if you're going to do that.
Well, we are just coming out of just free for all, total survival. Instinctually, we're not that far removed from being just killer. Like predator species. I mean, we're still basically predator species, but yeah, we'd be terrifying to walk up on. You know? I mean, it's nobody wants to communicate. I mean, the one thing that I go back to that always takes me back to this phenomenon is real, as opposed to some government misinformation campaign or whatever, because I think those are basically the only two options at this point. It's a government misinformation, disinformation, or this is legitimate extraterrestrials. I mean, the other possibility is this is all man-made technology that we've somehow been able to develop, but the case that always brings me back to extraterrestrial is the school kids in Zimbabwe, the aerial kids. Yeah.
And Westall School as well in Australia.
In Australia, yeah, that one was big as well. But I mean, the aerial school thing, and I guess the Westall was like 30 years earlier, I guess, right? So but all these kids are still alive. These it was like 1995, I think, and you've got 60-something school children who all saw a saucer land or a spacecraft land, something get out of it, an entity appeared on the top of the spacecraft and is communicating with them telepathically. And, they've been investigated. They have a psychologist, John Mack, goes out there and he's talking to them. He's talking to them individually. They're all writing down images of the same thing that they saw. Very consistent, and it's like, well, if it just always brings me back to, this phenomenon is real and this phenomenon is extraterrestrial, at least in part, because it's like there's no other explanation for that. If you believe people, if you believe like kids, school kids, I mean, these people are still alive today and clearly very traumatized by the incident and still telling the exact same story that they were telling.
Same story.
Right. I'd love to have one or two of those people on and, kind of talk to them about it. But it's like, I was going to ask you, the Tic-Tac incident, your percentage in terms of you think that there's a what percent chance that that's extraterrestrial versus what percent chance that that's U.S. technology? I've kind of always leaned extraterrestrial, but what do you think on that one?
Well, so I'm going to go back. Before, I'll answer that, but I want to address what you said about the kids, because it's super important to give a little extra weight to the data. Gary talks a lot about the difference between data and evidence, but the data that you gather from kids and the data that you gather from a deathbed, that deserves extra weight in terms of the motivation to deceive. Now, kids have plenty of motivation to deceive, especially if they're in trouble. But here's the thing. They're lousy criminals. They have not learned to lie effectively yet. They just don't have enough experience in the world to do it. And I was just talking this with somebody, I think, at the airport yesterday, about my oldest daughter versus my youngest daughter. My youngest daughter, only 18 months younger, she's a better liar than the older one, because she saw what the older one was able to get away with and what was not able to get away with it. And so she was able to be a more skilled deceptor. So that's what's so important about those aerial kids is, and as you already pointed out, this story stays the same. It wasn't like they suddenly woke up and realized, oh, I misinterpreted. No. And Randall Nickerson, who did that documentary, a lot of people don't realize Randall was one of John Mack's patients, if you will. And so I could put you in touch with Randall about that. And he did a great job on that documentary. So that's really important. But on the other side, the deathbed confessions of folks, Area 51, Roswell, and so forth. Where's the motivation to lie? There's no value to you. You're about to kick, so come clean. So those deserve a little extra weight as data points into the evidence. As far as the Tic-Tac goes, I have enormous respect for David Fravor, Ryan Graves. I haven't met David, but I have met and talked with Ryan Graves at length. I haven't met Alex Dietrich either, but they are just about as reliable a witness as you could ever imagine.
Yeah,
right.
That happened. I mean, like we that's 100% that event happened. I mean, there's it's been proven to have taken place. So it's not even there's no question about it anymore.
Yeah, not in my mind. I don't think that
But there's radar, right? I mean, there's FLIR, there's forward-looking infrared, there's the testimony from the people on the ship that saw the crafts dropping 80,000 feet down
Kevin
to sea
Day,
level,
right? Yep.
All of that. I mean,
Sean
it's corroborated.
Cahill, all those folks.
There's like 8 different ways that this thing has been proven to be a factual incident that actually took place. The only question is, was it extraterrestrial or is this some advanced human technology? I mean, that's all that's left to figure out, it seems like.
Yeah, and that's where I would have to defer to them, right? Because I have arguably a little bit higher level of understanding of physics than the average Joe because I had to take it at Whoops. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention about the Idaho Falls thing, that was all classified until like 2017, 2018, right before that book came out. So I remember, and I didn't get into this with Ross, and so I want to get into it with you as to why I know that I interacted with NHI, but I believe my birth certificate. So there was a little independent corroboration of my birth certificate. Because do you remember when you were born, coming out of your mom's womb? There are a very, very small percentage, 10 sigma people who literally remember being in the womb. And that's a fantastic aspect of it because their brain, their memory circuits haven't arrived yet. So how does that, But in any case, I did receive some independent corroboration that my parents were not lying to me. They were not Russian agents, and that I was born in Vladivostok and transplanted here, because I remember going home on leave from West Point, and I had my physics class required us to do a classified project on nuclear. We could pick nuclear energy or nuclear weapons, but it had to have something to do with that area. And it was all in the basement of Mahan Hall, which was a classified area. And so I did it on that. I did my subject on Idaho Falls when I saw it, me and John Dutchson. So I remember going home to my dad, and he's like, how's school going, blah, blah, blah. And I told him about doing this research project on Idaho Falls. And he was dumbfounded. He's like, how the hell did you know all that? I was like, Dad, it was just, it was classified, but we got into it. And so his physical reaction made me realize that it wasn't just a story, that what he said was true, because those details matched up with what he told me and what I found on the other side. So it's that sort of independence of information. But what I can't do, Matt, is sitting here, all of us were trained in identifying Soviet aircraft, right, throughout the Cold War. So we used to have these little aircraft recognition cards that we would play poker with or played card games on while you're bored out of your mind, right? And so it was to get used to identifying those aircraft. So I brought this up at SEU yesterday, maybe as a method to desensitize our second responders. First responders are me and you when we get in the action. The second responders are the heroes. They come in when everybody else is coming out. So those second responders, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and so forth, that come across this UFO crash, right, or UAP crash, in order to desensitize them to the beings that they might see in that and send them into ontological shock and interfere with their ability to perform their jobs, maybe we pass out these cards with, instead of hearts, we have little gray guys. And instead of diamonds are the mantis guys. And instead of, and you put that image to get them used to it and to desensitize to them. Just like we used to desensitize our astronauts. I was talking about, seeing John Glenn in a centrifuge. That wasn't at Marshall, but what they did do with astronauts in Huntsville is they put them on shaker tables to get them used to, the rocket launch. I remember Gordon Cooper reading about him falling asleep on the launch pad because he'd be so desensitized. It was like, give me something scary to keep me awake, So I would have to defer to Ryan Graves or Dave Fravor or Alex Dietrich as to whether or not they thought that was man-made or not. And David,
he's
Top Gun God,
adamant that it was not man-made.
He was adamant,
yeah.
Absolutely. So that satisfies both the credibility and the accuracy components to that report. And so I have no reason. There's no reason for me to be to not believe he or Ryan or Kevin Day or any of the other folks. So Kevin Day is the equivalent of looking at a radar track to decide whether or not that's human or not, just based on that behavior. And Sean Cahill, same way in terms of identifying lights in the sky with the big eye binoculars, right, at night. So each of those independent folks are experts in their area of identifying and making that call, friend or foe, IFF, right? Is it theirs or ours? And ours now, zooming out to a global perspective, human versus non-human, they have all stated for the record, and I have no reason to believe that they wouldn't, but Ryan, swore, and Dave, in front of Congress, so you can't get much higher than that. So if they think it's of non-human origin, I have no reason not to agree with that.
Totally agree with you. Let's double click on that a little bit and explore the other possibility. Did you see that this Wall Street Journal article that came out last week? And they're talking about how it's, Ryan, maybe you can pull it up. They're talking about how it's disinformation that's kind of fooled the world and the Pentagon's disinformation that fueled America's UFO mythology. So they're leaving the door open that maybe some of it's real, but they're stating really strongly that that this has been just a series of disinformation campaigns within the U.S. military and within the government, where they're feeding people information, and these people feel as if they're telling the truth and that they're reporting on what they know, but in reality, it's just this big government campaign to confuse people and to confuse our enemies and to not have Russia thinking about what we're building. And so I guess like that kind of, I think that's a good segue off of the Tic-Tac incident, and like what type of tech is this extraterrestrial? Is this human? Because they're saying, okay, they're heavily implying now that this is all human technology. So you just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because I wanted to bring this in when we were talking about the SEU conference. So that was such a fantastic experience for me that I was invited to go there, but I got there late because I flew in from LA, and you're swimming upstream when you go West Coast to East Coast. So I got there late, and I did not see Jay Stratton's keynote address, which was Friday night, the opening for the whole conference. And it was also before I finally, again, Neanderthal frontal slope, it occurred to me that Rich Hoffman, who was running the whole thing, was the same Rich Hoffman that was the MUFON guy. So I thought I was going into a disinformation campaign. I thought that's what SCU was going to be. And they didn't want anything to do with frickin' abductions. And it's just going to be all nuts and bolts about disproving. So I thought this was sort of a disinformation conference. That's what I didn't really think that was the case, but that was my concern, right?
You're saying that because MUFON is
no, I didn't realize there was any MUFON, anybody from MUFON at that conference. I was really surprised that was the same Rich Hoffman.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, you're just saying the scientific component of it made you think, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So that's one. But the second thing was, my God, they got a disinformation agent as their keynote speaker. Here's Jay Stratton, who ran the UAP task force, and he didn't frickin' blow the whistle on anything, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go, but I'll be a wallflower, and I'll just be rolling my eyes. And it turned out to be just the opposite, Matt. I got to tell you, so Jay and I have interacted indirectly through other folks, on like text strings and things like this. And I've always found him to be very credible in what he says. But I had put him, just like I accused humanity of doing, I put him in the disinformation bucket because he was part of the UAP. He established the UAP task force. Him and Jim Lukatsky established OSAP and ATIP, depending on, So he blew me away. Because right off the bat, and this is very subtle, but hugely significant. And what he said was early in his talk, and by the way, I wasn't there for the talk, so I had to watch it. They had an app that everybody that was at the conference could watch any of the because all the presentations were filmed, and so you could watch it afterwards. So I watched it yesterday. I think in my hotel room. No, I watched it while I was driving back down to Birmingham to fly down here. And I almost pulled the car over. Because what he said was, early on in his speech, and it was phenomenal, and he got choked up in it when he was talking about 9/11. But, and so that got me choked up about my 9/11 experiences. But what really threw me was when he said that, and this is the first time I've heard a government official do this. He said that when he and Lukatsky were looking at all of the reports in 2005 timeframe, 0405 timeframe, not the legacy reports from the 60s and 70s, which I'm excited, which I really wanted to hear about, but they didn't dig into that stuff. They were spun up, all in the current century. And what he said was that really blew me away was that the instance that they saw about the incursions of UFOs, they were still using the term UFO at the time, UFO incursions on nuclear installations. That was mostly Lukatsky's stuff, and Jay's stuff was, the aeronautics, aerospace, the rest, and pretty much everything besides the nukes. And he said what he saw was UAP activity that was a concern. And I stopped the recording. I was like, whoa, that is huge. That is that one term, because he didn't say threat. And the thing that keeps pissing me off about this, and I've here I am on my little soapbox here as never being read in on any of that. And even though I was my ORB, my officer record brief shows that I was an intelligence officer as a first lieutenant in Germany during the Cold War in 80, I think it was 84 to 85. I was a commander 5 times, right? Not a very good one. I've said that many times, but I saw what good commanders do. And a commander's perspective is different than an intelligence officer's perspective. An intelligence officer, whether or not you're a civilian or in uniform, an intelligence officer has to look at the world through threat-colored glasses, rose-colored, threat-colored. You have to. That's what your job is. Your job is to warn the commander what the worst possible thing that you may have to threat. So the worst thing an intelligence officer can do is say, boss, when we go into the jungle there, not a lot of bad guys. And then when you go in and it's a freaking hornet's nest and you lose half of your doggone patrol, right? Or half of your unit, whatever it is, brigade, battalion, battery company. And so just about everybody else that I'd ever heard, including Lou Elizondo, had used the term threat almost synonymously with UAP. And here's this guy who I think is part of the cover-up, and he's like, he didn't say threat, he said concern. And this is the kicker. And then, like, the next sentence, or maybe the sentence after that, in his speech, he says that he realized that the stigma is the threat. And I was like, wow. So we just converged big time right then and there with our perspectives, because that's what my claim is. It's the stigma, the narrow-minded perspective that is a greater threat to national security than the UAP themselves. And to hear him, a 2-star equivalent, say that in public, in front of God and country, that just blew me away. And so that was the one thing, that probably the most momentous aspect. Not to mention, when Rich Hoffman came out and almost tackled me over that question about, how do you keep your people motivated if you can't get access for a literature review? And so we would, it was just a sort of a big convergence, sort of love fest there with those two. But then the next thing that Jay said also shook me up. He said that when he and Jim Lukatsky were originally spinning up OSAP with the $22 million from Harry Reid and Ted Stevens and Daniel Inouye, the 3 senators, and which is really, Lou likes to talk about it. He's absolutely correct that this is a potential to unite us because there's bipartisan support for this politically. But it's not just now, and it's not just since Lou came out. I mean, you had Stevens, a Republican from Alaska, and Reid, a Democrat from Nevada, and Inouye, a Democrat from Hawaii, all getting together to start up, to give Jim and Jay the money to start this up. So it was bipartisan way back then, right? When they spun up OSAP. And then it got squashed and then became ATIP and then the UAP task force, et cetera. But what he said was that he and Jim went looking for the legacy program. They went looking for the cover-up folks that had, after the Condon Committee, the official story was, we don't care about UFOs anymore because there's no such thing. And any of us that are in the invisible college, yourself included, obviously, right? And a lot of us that have stayed engaged in this, that's BS. That they continue to do that. So Jay and Jim went looking for that, and they said they couldn't find it. They couldn't find one. There was no organization anywhere in the government that was taking this seriously. So they started OSAP. Later, he's not very clear about how much later, but once they got into it, it turned out that there was another organization. And he never He never gets into the details of it for good reason. You know, it's just like the FBI. You don't want to advertise all of your suspects, you know, because if they all dry up, then the real suspect is gone, right? So you've just warned the folks that you're trying to catch. So, you know, a lot of the folks that, you know, claim, why don't you just come open kimono? Well, doggone it, folks, you gotta realize this is like the FBI investigating a crime, right? So you don't want to advertise to the criminals that you know who they are, right? And so that's a case against full open kimono right off the bat. And a lot of the civilian world just doesn't understand that. But what he did say was that he did come across, and so now he was admitting that there's another program that is competing with his, and he and Jim McCaskey approached them and tried to get them, and they wanted nothing to do with it. It was a competition. And they thought, they saw, reading between the lines in Jay's speech, this legacy program saw OSAP as a competition, and they shut them down. They won that battle by squashing their funding. And so that's how NIDS and Bigelow and all the rest of that dried up. Because it didn't, you know, Bigelow claims, or a lot of folks in that sequence claimed that COVID, you know, as of COVID, they shut everything down. No. It was this other program, I think, that was able to terminate the funding. Because why didn't they just come back after COVID like everybody else did? You guys were remarkably resilient after COVID, right? And a lot of that's tribute to your leadership and the fact that you don't have the debt and all the rest of that, which is your legacy, which, again, I applaud vigorously. So humans by nature are resilient. We'll bounce back from that stuff. So why didn't they bounce back? They were dead. And then they became ATIP. And then Jay, again, heroically in my mind, established the UAP task force, and then that faded away. So this other program has been successful in squashing them. So I had thought that Jay Stratton was part of the cover-up, and he's not. He's a victim. He and OSAP and UAP task force have been a victim of that. And what I wonder about is whether or not this other program has come to the surface through Arrow, because it's pretty clear that Sean Kirkpatrick is part of that other effort, and so there's contention. So what we're seeing here is elements of the government infighting against each other. And so when the civilian world, and I heard this at Content and Digital all the time, the government, it's not a collective. It's like it's like these guys. We could have, there's a lot of innuendo that there are grays fighting grays. There's good grays and bad grays. And there are many stories of the good gray guys re-abducting folks and removing implants that the bad gray guys had put in. And so in Terry's case, you know, he talks about Betty wearing this ridiculous wig. I know of several other cases very similar where they actually wear masks, like a plastic Halloween mask. And the person that's taken, you know, wakes up kind of like after your black mist occurs, and then after the mist clears and you're looking at somebody sitting on that couch over there in your bedroom, and you can't move because they're more afraid of us. It's kind of like if you were to do an interview with, I don't know, a gorilla, right, that could snap you in two, like Mario Woods could snap me in two. That's been pretty well established. And so I would want to paralyze Mario. You know, I'm not going to paralyze your mouth or your telepathic capacity so we can communicate, but I don't want you jumping across and snapping my neck. So, and what they telepathically tell the person that's taken is, look, we don't want to scare you. We know our presence scares you. So I'm wearing this stupid mask to make you less afraid. And then I think it was Deb Cobble's like, well, it ain't fucking working. Take it off, right? Now you're just pissing me off. So it's amplifying. So all of that in context to say that we don't have a cohesive message coming from our own government. We can pretend, but it ain't. It is not cohesive. And we need to have somebody that's got enough courage to pull it all together and admit to us, yeah, look, we have had factions within our own government on both sides of this.
It's so freaking confusing,
isn't it?
You know, it's like it's such a shit show.
It is.
It's like it's a confusing enough phenomenon, but all of the agencies and all the people involved and all the, you know, the history and all the intentions that people have and their motives and why they're saying what they're saying and nobody can make any sense of it. Like, it's such like you have to like have this as your full-time thing in order to even, you know, have a remote chance of understanding the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
It's very challenging, but at the end of the day, I mean, there's things that are happening to people around the world. They're seeing things, they're encountering things, and some of them are just undeniable. I mean, Westall and Ariel School and the Tic-Tac Incident, and that's just where it starts. I mean, there's thousands of other incidents like that, and so, you know, the disinformation, the possibility about disinformation. I asked AI yesterday, I said, you know, just based on everything that you know, take into account everything. Tell me, in your opinion, what do you think the percentage chance is that this is a legitimate phenomenon versus a government, you know, whatever, disinformation campaign versus a combination of both versus other versus, you know, and I gave it a couple other options, and it said, in 2025, based on everything that we know right now, there's a 63% chance that this is real. There's a 25% chance that it's a disinformation
This
campaign.
is what ChatGPT
This is what
telling?
ChatGPT said, yeah, like yesterday.
63?
Yeah, 63% chance that it's real. And so, you know, if you ask, if AI had been around 10 years ago, you know, you might have gotten like a 30% number.
Yeah.
You know, if it was around 25 years ago, you might have gotten a 15% number. You know, I mean, you go back into the 80s and you're talking 5%. So,
Right.
I mean, you know, we're skyrocketing in terms of like, and this is like global intelligence, you know, that's telling us that this is real, and it's getting more real every day.
So I'm going to put my psychologist hat on and ask you, how does that make you feel, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've always been super interested in understanding the true nature of reality, you know, since I was a kid. Like I was told stories by my parents about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and, you know, all this. And it's like, and then like I hear Bob Lazar coming on the television when I'm 11 years old talking about, you know, working at this space station, working on reverse engineering spacecraft, and it's like, okay, you know, I've always kind of been trying to figure out what's really real out there, and what are, you know, and so the nature of beliefs is super fascinating to me, and just the fact that the entire human species is confusing beliefs with reality and with truth, and that there's really no distinguishing between the two. When we talk about what our belief is about something, we're talking about it as if it's a reality, and this is how we talk to our children, and this is how we raise our children, and so this is a part of the current human condition, the current human dysfunction, if you would call it that, and it's we need a baseline for what reality is and for the place that we're operating in. I mean, we're just entities of awareness. We're attempting to take in light as it comes to us, and that's what our entire brain is there to, you know, to and our eyes are inputting light, and then our brains are processing it. And so we really just need to figure out what is truth and what is not truth. You know, are we in a simulation? Are we in base reality? Are there UFOs? You know, are there what is there other life in the universe, in the galaxy, in the solar system, you know, on our planet, you know, like, these are just key fundamental questions. What is life? You know, like, that's a fundamental question that I had a conversation with Avi Loeb about a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, scientist, and he just dismisses it. He's like, it's not even, you know, when you're dead, you're dead. The human brain is the center of consciousness, and there's nothing after that. It's like unplugging a computer. It's done. And this is like what science thinks today, that there's no continuation of consciousness. Meanwhile, you've got people having near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, and you've got science saying, "Oh, it's just your mind, it's just your brain." It's like, but these people are seeing things, they're experiencing things that they come back and report on that they couldn't have otherwise known if it was just a mind thing and they were still just in their body. They're seeing things, in other places, in other locations physically. So the reality, the nature of reality is super important. And just for us as a species to understand, like, to be able to progress. And I feel like there's going to be more continuity, more connection, more compassion if we start to answer some of these basic questions, and that we can advance more, and that maybe we don't have to spend 30% of our resources on bombs and nuclear weapons and blowing each other up. Maybe we can start to spend some of that on advancement, because there's less fear, because we're more connected, because we know, for example, what is life. We don't even know what life is. Like, we don't even know what we are, who we are, what are, why we're here, what's the, some of these are just basic things that I think we have to start to get to the bottom of. And this is a big part of the reason why I created the podcast, is to kind of explore some of these questions.
Well, I want to make you feel even better.
Okay.
Because I want to throw you up on the hero pedestal, because you're making it happen, bro. You are part of the reason for this shift. And so one of the other things that Jay said, which was really, really important, is he addresses that. Here you have your own government. You got two programs. One's trying to break it out, and the other is trying to cover it up. And arguably, that Wall Street Journal article came from that other side, right? So you have this thing going back and forth, and it's, that's meta misinformation. It's misinformation about misinformation, right?
Right.
So you should feel real good about that, because what Jay said is that, the way to bring about this change is not from your government. Don't sit back and let your government tell you what to think. Go out and do it. But you gotta do it with the rigor that helps you sort through the disinformation, right? So that's why peer-reviewed journal articles are so important. And that's what makes SCU important as a new place that you can publish on a controversial subject. But that doesn't mean they're going to waive science and just take any story. Stories are important. It's data. It's not to be dismissed. But it takes a bit for data to become evidence, right? So it's got to be analyzed and so forth. And so what I would call for is compassionate skepticism. You need to be skeptical, but you need to be skeptical in a compassionate way. And so we had quite a bit of a discussion about this with Rich and some other folks about the problem that law enforcement has, because the vast majority of people that they pull over, if it's a traffic stop, are trying to get out of a ticket. So you got to kind of be harshly skeptical. But here's the problem, is if you have somebody that has been traumatized with an anomalous experience, whether it's in their car or on a mountain bike in broad daylight, the minute that you start asking them those necessary questions, have you been drinking? All right. You know what? I'm gonna use a little foul language here, but to play the scenario, you know what, motherfucker? You don't trust me, so I'm not. There's nothing that I'm going to say that you're gonna listen to. So then you just bottle up, and you don't share anything, and that does us all a disservice. So the way that Sean mentioned this yesterday, his answer to the question was, well, what I would suggest is that we just have a conversation, and so maybe you don't even ask the question. You just let them just tell the story. And then, if there's some way that you can, and you got to be clever, but you got to be compassionately clever to bring that situation up. And maybe part of the way to do it is to admit, hey, I had a couple of beers, before I came out here to see you. And then if that person says, well, you know what, I probably would have too, but I was driving to the bar, right? Or I was driving home. So I could have a cocktail or, do some doobies or whatever it is, right? And bring that in. So it's got to be a compassion mechanism because, I mentioned, and Rich and I agree on this vigorously, that experiencers are traumatized twice. First by the experience, then by coming public. And this is what I want to applaud you for, is being compassionate with everybody that you have. But I'm going to argue for a third. It's a triple. Because then the third time is on social media when somebody sees you treating them compassionately, and then they just frickin' all the trolls come out. And so I couldn't agree with you more that we got to drag humanity into being more compassionate amongst ourselves to get to the truth. Because when you treat somebody harshly and you interrogate them about this anomalous experience, you button it up. That's anti-truth. It may not necessarily be deception, but it is suppression of the truth. And again, that's the only thing I can blow the whistle on, is the way that Mario was treated by his own chain of command.
Right.
The way that Terry was treated by his own chain of command. He's got burned retinas. He's in a hotel room, or he's in a hospital room, in the very hospital that he had served in, knew the staff. And so the nurse tells the AFOSI agents coming in that, hey, we got to leave the lights low. And they flick on the lights and dismiss the nurse in direct violation of the hospital orders to treat this patient with low light conditions. Well, and this is, I'm paraphrasing Terry, who is paraphrasing the AOSI guy. Well, can't work in the dark. We got to ask them questions. So they're intentionally causing discomfort. And like with Mario, his commanding officer intentionally, guy's freaking exhausted. He's burned. He's obviously got some sort of radiation thing, even though maybe his tooth wiggling, the gum thing, again, which you guys did a great job on, kind of helping him. So we got to, when you treat people badly who are telling you about these anomalous experiences, you are anti-truth. You are suppressing the truth, which I think...
And you're a bully.
And you're a bully.
Yeah.
And so that...
And you're judgmental.
Yeah.
And you're a lot of things.
And so if you're looking at these angry monkeys treating each other like this, especially within the military, I mean, it's corrosive to the military, So
especially somebody who's just gone through a significant amount of trauma, that
absolutely,
yeah, just to judge it as all, whatever, because it doesn't fit into your reality, you're judging it as, fake, or that they're lying or grifting or whatever, it's like, I think open-mindedness cures that. If you can just stay open to possibilities and trust people and stay open along the way. Everybody tries to, like you said earlier, we're just label stuff and it's like we label situations, we label people, and it's like, okay, well, this one's, we go through life doing that so that we take everything to 100 or 0. This is, this guy's lying, this guy's telling the truth, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. We put it aside, like, okay, now my brain, it's compartmentalized, all that stuff. So now I feel comfortable in this reality that I've created by, labeling everything and judging everything. And it's,
and we approach it binary, right?
Yeah.
It's either white or black. There's not we got to have the gray. We got to have room for the gray.
Exactly.
And this is what Jay was talking about, is we got to embrace the gray. There is a middle ground here. And so you simplify it by putting it in one bin or the other, and let's dive into the gray with a compassionate skepticism and use the peer-reviewed process, to sort that out. But as soon as you dump somebody into the crazy bucket, just because they even use the word, and so that was the other thing that he really flipped me on, because I was furious about over the term UAP, when they started using that. And so
That
Jay
was, you know where that came from? Oh gosh, I had him on the show. Nick Pope created that.
Did
yeah,
he?
Yeah, yeah.
So Jay admits that he didn't invent the term. He didn't credit Nick with that. I've met Nick Pope back in Roswell, believe it or not. One of the very few, I think I've been to 3, now 4 UAP, UFO conferences in my life. But Nick wasn't one of them. It was when I was at the Air Force Academy, and the Lou had just come out with those videos, Lou and Chris Mullen, again, heroically sacrificing themselves, their own careers for taking on this subject. And I was stunned that the Air Force Academy was doing nothing about it. And I'm like, if anybody ought to be addressing this as part of their curriculum, if nothing else, your own cadets are going to see this. You need to help them negotiate this gray area like Jay was talking about. You got people out there that have now, they know that there's these two programs. There's the good guys trying to bring it out, the Dave Grushes, the Jay Strattons, the Luis Elizondos of the world, the Jim Lukatskys of the world. And then you got Sean Kirkpatrick and this legacy group that's trying to squash it. So what are you supposed to do in that? So if there's any place that should have been dealing with that, it was the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy with USOs, right? And at least the Naval Academy has a professor who is teaching a class on UAP and paranormal stuff, the history of it. Great guy. And I'll link you up with him. I don't want to use his name unless he wants to come on, so we can talk about that later. So I had gone to Roswell to try to invite some prominent folks back to the Air Force Academy to let's do a faculty debate. And it was in the summer break, between semesters. And I'd actually even attended a Trekkie party at the end of the semester with a bunch of faculty. Apparently they do this every semester. And so you got a bunch of people that have gone out and purchased Star Trek uniforms, and they're in this, arboretum or whatever you want to call it, a meeting room where you teach classes and so forth. And I try to bring up this subject, and they're like, what do you can't talk about that. And this is 6 months after the Wall Street or the New York Times article had come out. And the videos, the Tic-Tac videos were all over the place. And so that summer, I was going to ask Rich Dolan and Nick and Linda Moulton Howe, and I wanted to get a panel of the prominent researchers, well-established researchers, and let's have a debate with some of the folks on the very ultra-skeptical folks at the Air Force Academy. My faculty members couldn't get it together. And that was no small part in my, resigning my job there. But again, what Jay pointed out was the way to do the shift is not to sit back and let your government tell you what to think. You need to be in charge, and that's why you're so important with this, is because through the media and letting people come on and tell their stories, that's what's going to get. So I would argue, that's just ChatGPT was the 63%. Who knows what, if you put EEG caps on as the ultimate lie detector, what folks are really going to think, and spread that out. You may be bumping it up to 70 or 80. We'll see how that goes.
It's going to go up over time. I posted that article on Facebook in 2017, right after it came out, the New York Times article, and like I'm thinking, oh man, this is gonna get people talking. Why aren't people talking about this? It was like the next day, and I posted it, and usually my posts will get a bunch of replies and people will talk or whatever. Nothing.
Crickets chirping, right?
Crickets, zero. Nobody even touched it, and it made me quit Facebook. Like I made me quit social media completely. Like that moment of, oh my God, this is like the most important thing, the most important news that's ever come out about reality and about and everybody's like just totally ignoring it. And it's like, just continue to post pictures of, smiley, happy, I'm at dinner, I'm drinking beer, but like nobody will talk about this. And it's like, what is going on? Like what what is this place? Where, where am I?
It's just like Arrow, right?
Yeah.
And I know of John Kozlowski, I knew his boss, and he's in a tough place because I think he's just being muzzled, And so the default is we have no evidence, right? I have no evidence that there's a couch over there or that there's a microphone in front of me, right? I mean, it's such a cop-out. It's such a cowardly effort. Now, I don't want to call him a coward, but whoever's pulling his strings, you're a freaking coward, right? So from a leadership perspective, the good leaders that I mentioned that I would follow into a hail of gunfire, number one, are willing to be vulnerable. They will admit their mistakes. They will admit the problems that they had. Just like I saw, Jay was tap dancing around it a little bit in this talk, but there he was, and coming clean. He didn't necessarily admit any mistakes, but he was being forthright. Now, he's not going to tell you all the government secrets, right? Because he probably still has a security clearance and so forth. And there are things that look, there are good secrets. And I want to challenge, my civilian friends out there that want the government to share everything open. Come on, I think a lot of civilians look at me like Colonel Jessup, they look at any military colonel as, you can't handle the truth. And that is sort of the stance that Arrow's taken. You can't handle the truth. There is that yin to the yang here of Jay and Dave Grush and Lou and all these folks and Chris Mellon who are trying to do this disclosure. Some are softer than others. I am much more of the open kimono thing, but there are those who claim that that humanity can't handle it. And I'm here with whatever scientific credentials I have to claim that is BS. You have a BS guy, so I used to tell my buddies, they'd ask, so what are you teaching at the Air Force Academy? I'm like, bro, the only thing I'm qualified to teach, which is BS, right? And so from a behavioral science standpoint, I'm here to haul up the BS flag on the Robertson panel's claim that we can't handle the truth. That is absolutely ridiculous.
Like, what would the truth be that would be so hard for us to
now
handle?
We get into it.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
This is, I claim it's the abduction phenomenon. The abduction phenomenon, and this is the title of my book, my first book is The Abduction Amnesty Knot, little k, big N-O-T. And a knot is a complicated thing that's difficult to undo. I don't know if you ever try to undone a nautical knot. Now that I have a sailboat, I'm dealing with this all the time, especially if something's been underwater for 2 years and there's all this crap around it. Getting that knot, that's why you have a marlin spike to pull that out. And I was wondering if you and Mario were going to get into that during his interview because his dad had all that nautical background as a maritime sailor. Anyway, the abduction, the reason why I think the abduction phenomenon is at the very core of it is that it gets to every dinner table, not just here in the United States, across the globe. Because you're talking about parents who are powerless to prevent their kids from being taken off the school ground at Ariel School. Now, none of those kids that I'm aware of, and I've talked to Randall Nicholson many times and many of the other folks involved in that documentary, that I don't have any reason to believe, and I don't think any of them have claimed an abduction experience in association with that. But they could have, right? Similar beings, you look at the sketches, and I think you've shown that up before, the sketches that the kids have drawn, that John Mack had in at least one of his books. And they're very similar to this guy. So, but the whole Robinson panel thing was based on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds radio program From when? The 30? When did the War of the Worlds, when was that radio broadcast? Was it 30s?
Yeah, maybe 40s, but right
Yeah.
around. Yeah.
So it was pre-World War II. And 38, that's what I thought. Thank you, Ryan. And so here's the thing. That was right between World War II or World War I and World War II, right? And so the world is already in a fear-mongering status. But I think it was aired in New Jersey, wasn't it? It was on a radio station in New Jersey. And so, yeah, a few people in New Jersey might have freaked out because that radio broadcast was in their backyard. I'm here to claim that nobody in Boston was freaking out about it. Nobody in LA was freaking out about it. So this legacy cover-up part of the government used that to clamp down. That it was literally Colonel Jessup telling all of the U.S. and then by extension the rest of the world, you can't handle this fact. And I'm going to claim it's a fact. This is something that I know based on what occurred with me. We are powerless to prevent abductions from happening. And that's what Sergeant Major Robert O. Dean told me in that hallway at the International UFO Congress in 2008. And I was troubled by this claim that, all abductions are military abductions. I didn't see any military guys during mine. Now Terry Lovelace did, Jeff Goodrich did, but they were not, at least in Terry's case, he's very clear about how they were not part of the abduction. They were there, but they refused to look at him. And he was, because all he could move was his eyes, he could see Toby, his buddy Toby, over on the side, given whatever field of view you can do with a saccade, that the eye movement that you can do, even though the rest of your body's paralyzed. But the guys in the tan flight suits never looked at him. And it was like they were obviously trying to avoid making eye contact. And I weighed in on Matt Ford's show about, from a cognitive psychology standpoint, that is very consistent with sort of a guilt, that you feel like, you kind of want to help them, but you're not allowed to, and that sort of thing. So what Sergeant Major Dean told me was, begrudgingly, that yes, that we did start to have an involvement, but it was like we were UN observers, with the blue helmets. You got military guys, you don't have weapons, you're allowed to observe, but it was kind of just to, be able to testify that nobody's being permanently harmed, and that their memories are taken away so that they can live a relatively productive life. And so you have 5 PRP qualified guys, which I claim, again, is a level even above David Fravor's credibility. Because if you can't trust somebody in proximity of nuclear weapons, who then becomes a assistant attorney general, who are you going to trust? Find me somebody more reliable than that. I can't. The intersection with the overlap of nuclear weapons with that job as attorney general, I just can't come up with it. Maybe you can, maybe somebody else can. I can't. So if in that context, you have a situation where there's an awareness, but you're powerless to intervene. So I think that's where our government has been since possibly even before 47, the infamous Roswell thing. Now, what Kevin Knuth just presented was a phenomenal spike, the data that he presented. Now, this guy's a very well-respected, top-of-the-heap scientist, and he showed this spike 2 days ago. His talk was on Saturday. That was 26 sigma in terms of its significance of all the reports that occurred in that summer of 1947, around the June timeframe. Nothing before it had ever come anywhere close. So you have this spike. So this, government claim that there's no evidence is absolutely ridiculous. And that's what he presented, that there is absolute evidence. But it doesn't get to the core of the why my buddies, my friends and sisters in uniform and out of uniform, good, very patriotic people, I would argue more trustworthy than the average citizen. And that's why they get a security clearance and others don't. Your average Joe doesn't take an oath to not talk about XYZ, not betray their country, whatever it is. And that's why I'm in direct contravention. I'm going to stand up against Colonel Jessup and say we can handle the truth. And as a behavioral scientist, all my training says that we can handle the truth. We can handle the fact that human beings have been plucked out of various occupations off of highways in the middle of the daylight, not just at night during dreams, not just at night before you go to bed. And by the way, you didn't have a bloody nose before you went to bed, and then in the morning there's blood on your sheets. You didn't have any bruises on your arm. You didn't have any sunburn. You didn't have any burns between the webbings of your fingers, between the webbings on your toes, and the bottoms of your feet. How do you get a sunburn on the bottom of your foot while you're dreaming? That's not sleep paralysis, bro. That does not, and sleep paralysis doesn't put something under your skin that then when you go to have it removed evades the scalpel, right? That's in Luis Elizondo's book. He's got a picture of it in his book. And he describes how the military surgeon freaked out because as he was trying to extract this thing, it was actively trying to evade him. And while I'm on that subject, that what a lot of folks, this is kind of the smoke and mirrors thing with the debunkers try to come up, they never address Roger Lear's tissue samples. So he not only, when Roger Lear, the podiatrist that extracted implants out of 19 patients, and he has in the back of his book the metallurgical analysis of that. But it's not just the metallurgical analysis. It's the analysis of the tissue around the implant. That is also anomalous, more anomalous than the metallurgy.
So he was connecting with abductees and removing implants from them?
Yes.
Okay.
19 of them. And he got sick and tired of being, so he turned all of his data over to
like the 80s or something? Or when was this?
Oh, yeah. No, this was, over a period of time. 90s all the way up to his death. I think he passed, I want to say he passed in 2018. Maybe Ryan can look that up for us. But his initial, let me see, 2014. There you go. Thank you, Ryan. And when his book was published, I want to say Aliens and the Scalpel. I think it was 05 maybe.
99
okay.
It looks like.
Casebook was 00 in 2001. Okay.
So does he has images of these?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Let's find those, Ryan. And he did this is fresh to me. So
oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So what did he find? What was the punchline?
Yeah. So he only provided two stories with he picked two representative stories to go along with the implants, but everybody had a story. And what stood out to me was, again, applying science to this. What stood out to me was that he sent a lot of that data, all of it, as I understand it, over to Bigelow and the NIDS project that we now know was obviously part of Jay Stratton's OSAP project. I don't know if Jay ever saw any of those reports, but Roger got frustrated that he wasn't able to publish a lot of that stuff. So then he later republished his book with the actual results, graphs of the metallurgical analysis in the back as an appendix. So that book was originally published in, I think, 90s, but then I think there was another edition that came out with the rest of the data, because he wasn't able to wrestle it loose from Bigelow and get it out there. So the metallurgical analysis is there, but then also the analysis of the tissue around it. And this is what's so compelling to me, is he's describing in the book about how long it's taking him to get this done, because he's renting this facility. He's doing this on the weekend because no hospital is going to let him, do surgeries of alien implants. Ain't happening. So he quietly, on his own dime, works this out and does this. And so he's got to get it done quick, because he's got to get, 2 or 3 folks done in a day. And he's tremendously under the gun, and I couldn't understand why the hell is he, I thought he's kind of whining about how long it takes. And, look, we all have our egos, and I thought it was a bit of an embellishment. Both of my grandfathers, by the way, were Army doctors. They ran evacuation hospitals. My mom's dad ran an evac hospital at the Battle of the Bulge, and my dad's dad ran an evac hospital, island hopping, riding Navy frigates and destroyers between islands and during the War in Pacific. Both decorated heroes, Bronze Star, and fascinating stories that go along with that. But all that to say that I'm appreciative and I'm aware enough about the medical community to understand that it's a pretty quick job to go in and remove the bullet. I talked a little bit about the John Wayne thing, just bite a stick and have a couple of shots of whiskey and we'll get that bullet out of you. And they just literally go in with the forceps and rip it out, because there's a path, there's a hole. So you just follow the hole down and take it out. And I'm thinking to myself this whole time while I'm reading through Roger's reports of these surgical procedures, why the hell is it taking this long? Why is everybody all ramped up and worried? And then it finally dawned on me at some point, and I remember putting the book down, and I grabbed my phone to make a note of this. He had no path. There was no scar tissue. And that is the most compelling thing of all. Never mind the metallurgical analysis of it, the weird structure and so on. There you go. Well done, Ryan. Look at that. So, yes, see that there's a couple of those.
So those are them, huh?
But that doesn't show the tissue around it, right? And so there you go. Wonderful. And what he talks about is how there's no immune system response. And the tissue around it was tremendously anomalous. And there was no path. So when you're taking a bullet out, you just follow the path that the bullet went in.
Sure.
Now, so I'm aware of this from my grandfathers, a lot of times they would leave shrapnel in the body. Yeah, there you go. That's a great one. They would leave shrapnel in a soldier's body if it wasn't immediately threatening any of the vital organs. So if something's over here and it's not threatening your heart, or in your leg and it's not close to the femoral artery, you'll take the shrapnel that's life-threatening out, and then you'll go back and, they're an evac hospital, so they just send them loose. So Roger was coming in way after the fact, right, that this thing had been in there. So he's like a military surgeon coming in 5 years after the soldier or sailor comes back from Afghanistan, and now the shrapnel's starting to bother him. It's not necessarily life-threatening, but, they want it out. And so let's get it out. Maybe it's corrosive. We have some uranium-tipped, bullets that hardening allows it to penetrate more. So the half-life probably isn't threatening, but you just want it out. So you're going to get it out. And in all those cases, you just follow the scar to get right to it. It's like a road map that I followed to get here. But in these cases that Roger was dealing with, there was no road. It was as if the shrapnel had been teletransported, using the Star Trek.
Sometimes there's scars, right? I mean, sometimes like my wife's cousin swears that he was abducted. His father says that he was abducted when he was, I believe, 8 years old. So my wife's uncle says that he was abducted in Tallahassee when he was 8 years old, and he ran in and he told my wife's grandfather, his dad at that time, like what had happened, and everybody just laughed at him. Like they all, they just said you're crazy. But they looked where he was saying like that they stuck him with something, and there was a scar, and it was like on his groin area. And I think that he had that scar for his entire life, and now his son is still alive. I actually want to connect with his son. His name's Matt, and he lives in Tallahassee. And I actually was thinking about actually trying to figure out a way to get this implant out of him. He thinks that he has an implant in him. And so I was actually thinking about doing the same thing that this guy was doing. This was a couple months. I just haven't circled back to reconnect with him, but I'd like to see what it is and what it looks like if there's really something there. I don't think you can tell the doctor what you're doing. You want to remove a foreign object,
sure.
And so, but I'm going to work on that. And but anyway, the scar thing. There's sometimes when people come back from these experiences, from what I understand from talking to Timothy Alberino and other people, that they do leave a mark. But you're saying that this thing actively avoided the surgeon. So is it, in some cases, is it as if it might be completely distant from that original mark, and the mark might not even exist. Of course, it may have healed, but in some cases, these things are like swimming throughout the body. Is that what I'm hearing you?
Yeah. So lots to unpack there. First of all, I want to be compassionate about your friend, and definitely let's stay in touch and let's work with that.
Okay.
And just because there's a scar doesn't mean that whatever's in there is naturally occurring.
Right.
I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that many of the patients that Roger Lear was removing objects from, there was no scar tissue to guide him, and that's why it took so long. In Terry Lovelace's case, very similar. When they took the x-rays, he went in because it was bothering his knee. It was going numb. And the x-ray tech was like, how the hell did it get in there? We don't see any way, because apparently if you process the x-ray the right way, or maybe use some dye or something, you can reveal the scar tissue. So, this is another thing that I love about what Jay talked about, is he said we got to stay away from scientism, because scientism is not science. Scientism would take that situation that you just said and flip my claim on its head, and Blitch says if there's a scar, then it ain't an implant. No, I'm not saying that at all. But scientism would do that. It would use what I'm saying to reject it in this binary black or white type of situation. So all I'm saying is, in Terry's case and in many of Roger Lear's cases, the absence of scar tissue is kind of like some of your vase collection, your vase collection. We can't do that. There is no medical that I know of, and again, it's not me because I'm not a surgeon, but Roger Lear claimed he is not aware of any process anywhere, even using lasers to cauterize or whatever, that you can insert a foreign object into the human body without an immune response that causes that scar.
What did they find out about the metal, or like the actual composition of these objects that they were removing? Like what was there? What did they learn?
Yeah, so there's in a lot of the metallurgical analysis, and this is another key point, because science evolves over time, right? And so the methods that you would use in the 50s to look at an object inside somebody's body, the electron microscope procedures have been refined 1,000 times over. John Mack, as a psychiatrist, he did not have the benefit of fMRI, of the EEG system that I purchased for $16,000 back in 2009. We didn't have the tools to look at it then. And so that's why it's very, very important, and I should have made this point at SEU, and if I ever go back, maybe next year, if I get my paper published, maybe I'll make this point, that it's worth reinvestigating, because with new tools comes new analysis and new revelations. So what might have been considered to be normal metal back in 1950, 1960, 1947, now, there you go. So see where it says they cannot. So I'm going to read this for the viewer, or maybe they could see it. But
yeah, go ahead, read it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it says contain a variety of elements, including iron, titanium, aluminum, but the researchers could not confirm they were of extraterrestrial origin. Okay, right, because you don't have an extraterrestrial origin to compare it to, right? And so, but it's not just the composition. So you throw a mass spectrometer at it, and you do a derivation of, and you can do this with fluoroscopy, like is mentioned there. You could do it from distant arrival at our sensors, Hubble or Webb telescopes in orbit without having to go through the atmosphere. And you can do spectrographic analysis of those photons to give you a material composition of a foreign body, of an asteroid. Does it have water on it? Yeah. If the photons coming to us have certain, so you can get a material composition, but even if it looks like normal atomic structure, the way that it's constructed, that's a whole different ballgame. And what has been said many times from very prominent scientists heroically diving into this UAP subject area, like Gary Nolan and many, many other folks. It's not necessarily about the composition of the individual elements. Everybody's looking for, unobtainium 123, or in Bob Lazar's case, element 115, right? Everybody's looking for that smoking gun. But you don't necessarily need that to show an anomalous situation. If the layering is at a subatomic particle, we don't have the ability to do that. To get, we can carve and script out substrates, but to get to a quantum level, to get to a subatomic level in that construction, we don't know how to do that. And so that's why we need to go back and relook that. So I'm dying to get a hold of those Rogers implants to redo it,
right,
and relook it.
If you do, let me know. I got a scientist down the street that's got an scanning electron microscope, and we can have a look at it and talk about it on the show if you want. But yeah, it's like that. Some of that material that's supposedly found at Roswell, where you crinkle it up and then it goes back and it expands.
Right.
Or the some of the outfits that the materials that they're said to have worn. Where
from the suits.
Yeah. It's all almost like.
Can you put that back up, right?
It's all almost created at that atomic level where you're just putting atoms next to atoms next to atoms, and it's that kind of material is fascinating.
So it's not just a matter of looking at spikes on a spectrographic analysis, because it's, what this points out is not just the layering or how it's put together, but the isotopic ratios. So whenever, a lot of times when I'm talking to people and you use the word isotope, they're like, oh my God, their eyes glaze over. So to make that simple, even though, this is essentially, depending on what high school you went, you probably dealt with isotopes or whatever, but an isotope is really simple when you consider that it's just, same number of electrons, same number of protons in the nucleus, same number of electrons, and you got neutrons, and it's just a little heavier. So you add a couple extra neutrons. So the isotopic ratios, so when you look at the half-life of how an atom will get rid of its subatomic particles, and that's all that radiation means, right? Or that's one form of radiation, is you got too much stuff in there in nature. You just want to reduce it. What nature entropy says is you reduce things to the lowest common level, and you reduce that energy output. And so it naturally disperses, right? That's why alcohol kind of disperses from your skin, cools you off, blah, blah, blah. That may not be the best analogy. Anyway, an isotopic ratio is really important because it's the same element, but you're trying to lighten it up in most cases. So what Roger Lear's analysis, he didn't do it, he sent it out to a lab, obviously, was that they had anomalous isotopic ratios. And those ratios were inconsistent with Earth-based materials. Now, that doesn't mean it's a spaceship, right? But you got to ask yourself, how did a little micrometeorite, if it's just a meteorite, how did that get under the skin without scar tissue, right? And that's what begs the question. And the skeptical folks out there, the narrow-minded folks who engage in scientism, will concoct and twist themselves into a logical pretzel to try to explain how this could possibly happen, when Occam's razor says, no, the guy said, one of those guys stuck it in his arm, and that's, when you look at parsimony, that is a form of parsimony. So my point is that Occam's razor cuts both ways. It cuts against scientism as well as it cuts, against some of the other aspects. So while we're on the isotopic ratios, I wanted to bring this up too. Have you ever had John Brandenburg on your show yet? Are you familiar with him?
I don't think so. Sounds vaguely familiar, but.
So I met John. I've read a bunch of his stuff over the years as part of the Invisible College. I met him at my very first UFO conference that I ever presented on back in just a couple of months ago. Lorian Fenton ran the UFO 2025 conference up in San Francisco. John was presenting, sort of representing some of his previous work as a plasma physicist. Started out at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, ended up in Albuquerque at Sandia National Labs, working on nuclear weapons. So he's a plasma guy, and he was originally working on plasma from nuclear fuel manipulation, I'll call it, to develop plasma as a potential propulsion mechanism to get us to Mars. So he goes from Lawrence Livermore to Sandia Labs, and while he's at Sandia Labs, he in the early '80s is imaging or is analyzing imagery from Mars because he is going to try to use a variant of plasma to try to land a future spaceship on Mars as part of our colonization efforts, right? So all that makes sense, and so that's just part of his job. And they also want to, so he's dual-hatted, so he's got this propulsion thing, but they also want to investigate, plasma for the classified side of things, making weapons and so forth, which, by the way, that's a good secret, right? We don't want, people that want us to, the government to show all their secrets. Do you really want to advertise to the world how to build a nuclear weapon? Is that a good thing to do? Is it a good thing to distribute on social media your gun-safe combination? There are good secrets. Some things need to be kept a secret. So the people that are trying to tear down Skywatcher for being a little bit secretive, wake up, folks. There are good secrets that we don't need to share, we don't want to share. It's to the detriment of humanity to share it. So if you have a nuclear technology that can be used for a weapon, or some other exotic technology that maybe Skywatcher has developed to sense, some of our own stuff, maybe we want to keep that a secret. So that's why Skywatcher is being secretive, is they have the ability with this new mechanism, this new dog whistle, to maybe detect our own stuff. And they want to make sure that they don't compromise our own advanced technology that gives us an edge over. So there's good reasons to keep things a secret. I digress. Back to John Brandenburg.
I could argue that, but we're gonna let it go.
We can do that.
Transparency is a huge value of our company. I think that if we get everything out there, if we get the truth out there for everybody, that we can handle it as we talked about earlier, and that ultimately you settle. You get to a point where everybody understands the secret of nuclear weapons, and so you transcend the ability to want to destroy everyone with nuclear weapons. As an example, if you can accept, okay, nukes are real, but we can't use them, then maybe that's okay to talk about. It's like this whole secrecy thing with the UFO phenomenon. It drives me crazy. Secrets in general drive me absolutely crazy. I don't think there's a good reason for any secret anywhere on the planet ever to have existed by anyone. I think that openness is incredibly, incredibly important.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go down that hole if you want, right?
We could. There's so many holes I want to go down though. But you keep going with this. But then I do have a couple of questions. I wanted to ask you about the implant. Like, do you know why? Like, why are they implanting? Like, I feel like that's such an important thing that we didn't get to kind of finish. But like, if you can just briefly close the loop on like why you think that these implants are going into us anyway. What is the metal doing within the human body? Or is it just for tracking purposes? And why is titanium able to track? Like, what is that all about? And then you get back to this guy that you were.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I've used the example several times about how we used to abduct polar bears off of an iceberg, an ice floe during the Cold War. We would essentially have a UFO, unidentified to them, helicopter, fly over, hover over them, look at them, scan them, and then from the air, we shoot them with a tranquilizer dart. We knock them out. Mother, 2 cubs. We lift the mother and the cubs in cargo nets up, bring them over onto a ship where we have a laboratory. In the laboratory, we take scoops out of them. We sample their body fat, their tissue, because what we're trying to do is extract from that what level of radiological isotope is being absorbed by them. And from that, we can reverse analyze to determine what the yield of the nukes that the Russians are testing up in Kamchatka or Siberia, whatever it is. And we can establish what sort of yield and what sort of material that they're using. Is it plutonium? Is it, and what's the xenon ratio? Xenon 129 to 132, which is what John Brandenburg does. So we do that. We have already done that to many other animals. And so, when you do that at one point in time, that gives you one snapshot. But what's really important with radiological pollution and the half-life of these materials that degrade over time is you want to get a longitudinal perspective of what it's doing to those poor bears, to those poor humans. What humans are doing to other humans by polluting this atmosphere. So it makes all the sense in the world to me, because I know we did this with our polar bears, that they would do that with us just to track the nuclear pollution from our own ridiculous self-destructive stuff. We got to look at nuclear testing as pollution, because it most certainly is. And so after Chernobyl, we've done the same thing with deer, with lots of local flora and fauna. And what's important about, the fauna part of it, the animal part of it, is as the animal eat the flora and it bioconcentrates in their body, and then it starts to interfere with the real sensitive aspects of our not our anthropology, our anatomy, right? And so if you want to do a longitudinal study and you want to look at especially the supersensitive reproductive organs that created those cubs, so that's why you need to take the cubs along with the mom, because you need to see how that transferred and how the damage to those telomeres, that the cell chromosomes that get passed from mom and dad to cubs. So you got to take all that. And so how do we think in our arrogance that the mom just feels like she went to sleep and we're not causing her any psychological trauma, right? But how do we know that when we dump her back on that ice floe, if we even take enough care to put her on the same ice floe in the same position, how do we know we're not causing her enormous trauma, right? And she wakes up and she can't see her cubs because we didn't take an extra level of care and compassion to put the cubs in the exact same position and pose that they were when we took them. So she wakes up and she doesn't see them, so she starts freaking out. Her heart's going nuts, and then the cubs are behind her, and then she relaxes, right? But how do we know that she didn't dive right in the water and didn't even see him, had to search all over for him? So we may be able to teach them a level of compassion because we are being more compassionate with the animals that we treat. There's a bunny app now that you can get. I think it's Happy Bunny or Happy Hop or whatever. And you can go through the grocery store and scan all the products to determine whether or not there was animal testing involved. And so my standard, first of all, I am in vigorous agreement with you that in a utopia world that we don't have any secrets. That would be wonderful. But how do we get there from here? So this is one step, is to hold ourselves accountable. There it is, well done. Leaping Bunny, that's what it was. Thank you so much, Ryan. So there's an app that you can use to see if the product that you're buying, whether it's shampoo or whatever, was tested on any animals, the poor little bunnies, right? So I think that the tampering with our memories is a form of that compassion, and it's to prevent us from the D to developing a D in PTSD. So does Terry Lovelace, does Mario Woods, does Jeff Goodrich, do we all have some form of post-traumatic stress? Yeah, we got PTS. And in Terry's case, you could argue that there was a little bit of a disorder that manifested in his circumnavigation of the square to get to his court appointment, because that's interrupting his daily life. It's interrupting his profession, and that's kind of the definition of a disorder in the DSM.
It's scientifically able to be seen with brain scans. My wife had PTSD, and so when you get your brain scan, there's a classic diamond pattern that appears within the brain on the scan, and she was diagnosed with that, and she cured it. She went through a lot of healing.
Wonderful.
And,
that warms my heart.
Yeah,
man.
yeah. It can absolutely go away with with a lot of work and potentially a little bit of help on some medicine that's now proven to cure PTSD.
That is wonderful to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
And good. And this is where, back in the first Gulf War, we didn't have it, right? We didn't have a lot of these scans, or even if we had it, it was so remote. But now, I mean, you can go get a scan, out of pocket. If you got $1,500, you can just do it. So we didn't have that back then. So this really warms my heart that we're able to deal with this. So, and and backing this out to the nuclear testing situation, that's what I think has occurred with us. Not all abductions are of that nature, but a lot of them are. And so if you want to do this longitudinal study, if they wanted to, if like we did, so we would go back, we would stick a tracker in that polar bear, and we want to come back after 5 years and see whether the damage from that fallout, from that, I don't know, 2 kiloton, 100 megaton, whatever it was, has started to fade. Is at what level has that healing occurred? And then we can extrapolate and try to determine, okay, what's the rate of recovery from that stress? Or what's the rate of recovery from that pollution? So that's what I think those trackers are for the most part. And that brings up another abnormal aspect of Roger Lear's work, because he and several other folks used electromagnetic frequency devices to monitor and measure emissions from these subcutaneous objects. And what's fascinating about it is that they would do it pre and post surgery. And so it's inside the body, and it is transmitting consistently, strongly at this frequency. And then after it's removed, it's still surrounded by some of the tissue, still transmitting. And then after the tissue is separated, and now after it's removed from the body, it's still transmitting, but it's weaker. And then after you remove the tissue, it eventually dies off altogether. So it's like it needs the body's function to power the transmitter. Kind of like the body's the battery to the radio, that sort of thing. So it's all these anomalous things that I want to bring to the public's awareness. And again, I'm working on this peer-reviewed journal article to point out that the abduction phenomenon has just as much nuts and bolts, rigorous empirical data associated with it as lights in the sky, as objects in the sky. I would say the equivalent of that EMF meter, that's the radar data, right? The anomalous tissue around it that shows no scarring, that's the equivalent, I don't know, of a long wave infrared sensor of it. And so there's a lot of that, but I think that the fear factor is why it's all been covered up. Because I can't connect the dots that all those folks are bad folks. I can't get there because, we all swore an oath to the country. We swore an oath to defend this country and to subjugate ourselves. Look, nobody gets rich joining the military, not on a relative basis. And I know you're probably more aware of that than most folks. You're doing it out of a desire to be part of something bigger than yourself. Now, I'm not here to. There is certainly corruption that happens in the military, just like everybody else. You got power-hungry people. I use this statistic all the time of 99% of violent crime is committed by 1% of the population. Well, that seems pretty small until you start thinking, well, let's say I had a graduating class from my high school. It was a huge high school. My high school graduating class was bigger than my West Point graduating, my college class. It was 1,000 kids. So 1% is 1 out of 100. That's 10 kids out of 1,000. That's 10 psychos out of 1,000, out of my entire high school. And I could probably name a few of them, right? Just from, being in an environment around it. So there, a matter of fact, it just occurred to me. I played football with one of them. And in any case, if you extrapolate that to 10,000 troops That means you got 100 psychos out there. You got 100 people who are willing to commit a violent crime against a fellow human. And now you give them a gun. So there's I'm not trying to pretend like everybody that joined the military or everybody that joined law enforcement or everybody that went into the fire service, right? But the vast majority of them, of us, are good folks. So I can't get to the point that I know there's a lot of perspective that everybody at the CIA is evil and they're all about suppression and control. I can't get there. What makes sense to me is that they had to be given a really good reason to threaten people to keep this a secret. You have to have a really good reason to keep a secret. The really good reason during World War II to keep the Manhattan Project a secret. Look, they didn't keep that a secret because they're going to get punished. You know, I've said this 100 times. I said this in my People Behind the Science interview back in 2014 with Mary McNeely. And because I dodged one of her questions. And I said, you know, and she goes, oh, please don't worry about it. I would never want you to get in trouble for anything you said on my show. And I said, Marie, thank you, but that's not why I'm keeping this quiet. You know, look, I've been in trouble my whole life. I set a record for demerits my plebe year at West Point. It's not about being in trouble. It's about doing the right thing. And so I'm convinced that what connects all the dots for me is that these people are shown something that is equivalent to the Manhattan Project. So what allowed them to keep that project really super secret for what, 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5, if you figure that it started in 1940 maybe, and say by 45 when they dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So that's 5 years. And the justification for that was to show them, everybody in the program, the horrors that Hitler was creating in Europe. And so once you show them that, and once you show them similar horrors that had occurred with, you know, the Japanese, and neither of those cultures are proud of that. And look at now. Both of those cultures are staunch allies of ours, right? And so there is hope. There is recovery from PTSD. There is recovery from bad, misled, misguided military activities. So I'm convinced that that's what plugged the vast majority of leaks. It wasn't zero. There were plenty of leaks, but that's what caused, you know, the CI people, the counterintelligence people during the Manhattan Project to do really bad things to fellow humans, to keep that a secret. It was the lesser of two evils. So for me, lights in the sky, that is insufficient motivation to keep all those folks a secret. Even the evidence of these guys, bodies, footprints, I'm pretty convinced that it's well established that J. Allen Hynek flipped over the Socorro, the Lonnie Zamora case. I've been there several times. Used to work out of there, and you know, you'd go through Stallion Gate to do some work when I was an Air Force scientist. But the inside of the onion, the very core of it, is the fear that's generated by the abduction phenomenon. Because
it just seems like we can get abducted. Like there can be 5 guys that bust in here right now with guns and just shoot us up and it's game over. Like nobody can stop that. Nobody can control that. I mean, we can't control the abduction phenomenon. You know, we can't like stop that from happening. But so who cares? Like we can handle that. Like we can handle that truth. Like there's stuff that you can't control. You can't predict. You can't. You know, life is not guaranteed. The next day is not guaranteed. But it's such a small detail of the possible things that could happen to me as an individual or to my kids as an individual, the chances still, even if the phenomenon's real and the abduction phenomenon is real, the chances that my kids are going to get abducted, the chances that I'm going to get abducted are still very small compared to walking across the street and getting hit by a car after we record this episode. So, it's like, if that's really the reason to keep a lie in place and to keep, it's like, why do we continue to cover it up? Why do we continue to build lie after lie? It's because you started the lie in the first place. Yeah. It's because you told the lie in the first place, and now you can't go back to it. And everything that you do, every decision that you do is built upon a lie after another lie after another lie. And it gets so big. It gets to be such a big, just false reality, just a lack of truth that you have to, because it's so big at that point that you just have to keep it going. And
let me agree and augment.
Yeah,
so
please.
I'm going to agree with what you said, but I'm going to point out that in that case that you just, to unpack this analogy and use the metaphor there, those people that do that to us, that break in with those weapons and so forth, there is a high likelihood that they're going to pay for that. That law enforcement will track those guys down. Somebody will call and hear the gunshots, at least see them squirreling out of the way, and there's at least a reasonable expectation that they will pay for that there will be consequences for that.
I don't care. I'm dead.
Right, but the other people, so the reason why it doesn't result in fear throughout all of Bradenton was because, there are holes in law enforcement. You can't protect everybody all the time, but that there will eventually be caught and there's a deterrent. So I love what you said about the lie and having to propagate that. There's another factor, and that is that our government is going to have to admit, as the police chief for the entire globe, or at least the entire United States, the United States military, United States Department of Defense is going to have to admit, sorry guys, we can't protect any of you.
But
at all.
Who cares? Like, why do they? It's just an ego thing that they have to feel like they can protect us from everything at all time. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
Nobody can protect you from everything at all time. It's total bullshit. And to have the government out there pretending like they know everything about everything and everything that's going on, and that they can protect us from all of these things, it's nonsense. None of that makes any sense at all. So why do they feel like they have to withhold that? It's like because it's a part of their identity. I've been sworn in to protect people, that they have to then, the amount of nonsense that creates it's astounding. I mean, it's limiting us from the ability to interact with reality and for us to experience and to understand true reality because of the ego of our elected officials. It's complete nonsense. It makes no sense.
It is about ego, Matt, for sure.
Yeah.
And so, one of the reasons that I used EEG, I decided to get into the neuro side for my dissertation, my third trip through grad school, was because of the ego. And my first degree was in AI and robotics. And so I decided to flip it and go from the biological side and look at the human side of the human robot team. And what I was quite sensitive to was this issue that you said, that we really have a hard time admitting our failures, admitting our incapacities. And it's evolutionarily that makes sense, right? Because we had to have a biased ego to take on the saber-toothed tiger, right? If we had a well-calibrated ego, sense of ourselves, we never would have left the cave, right? So and so in my former line of work, in hostage rescue, and even in artillery and the military and law enforcement and firefighting, a big ego is part of the job. Otherwise, you wouldn't rush into that building when everybody else is running out.
You can rush in without an ego. You can absolutely.
Well, so I'm trying to give you a perspective from the military mind. This is
I
my
get
perspective.
I get it, but it's broken. It's like the ego is broken. It doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it. You can absolutely do all these things without ego. You can rush into a building. You can protect people. But you can be honest and and like upfront with them, and you can gain more respect if you just say, I don't know. Or I can't help you there. Like, I mean, it's one thing to have a saber-toothed tiger and everybody, it's like, okay, this is about to, attack me or whatever. And it's one thing to realize there's nothing I can do about that. It's the same thing that when you realize there's nothing you can do about the UFO phenomenon. If they want to come here, they've traveled light years to get here in craft that we can't understand, bending space-time, accelerated faster than the speed of light. Like, sorry guys, I can't protect you. Like, that seems like people could handle that. Like, it just seems like we could handle that reality, that truth.
So my book is all about that.
Oh,
that
cool.
We can handle it. We can handle it. But from a military perspective, I'm just trying to give you an insight from the military mind, how we looked at it.
I understand.
And I'm trying to help you be compassionate with Harry Truman, and I'm trying to help you be compassionate with the people in the program, because this is the way they think about it. It's our job to protect everybody else. That's what we signed up for, and we can do it with the vast majority of threats. But that threat, we're inept. So all we can do is just like we did with Soviet technology. Whenever a Soviet jet crashed, we jump on it, we reverse engineer it, we take whatever stuff whatever little advantage they had over us, and we reverse engineer it, and we bring in our stuff. And they did the same with us, right? So, radar. Started, the development was not here. If anybody had a jump on it, it was Marconi in Italy in the early 30s. And we have evidence from Dave Grush that told us about evidence of a crash in Italy in 1933. So what I'm connecting the dots with is a windfall where what Marconi and other Italians were working on in Italy was a new sensor. It was not intended as a weapon, never intended to shoot anything down, but it was not passive. It was active. Just now we're starting to have passive radar. But there was active radar, and they, as they were coming down to study the angry monkeys, they didn't know we had radar. And all of a sudden, boom, they get hit with this directed energy, and it screws them up and they crash. Now we got something. Now there's hope for us. We're way outgunned. We're way out technologied, if that's even a verb, right? And so there is something we can do about it. Is we can start diving into this, right? And so radar propagates. It takes off throughout World War II, and parallel with that, you have Foo Fighters. You have all of these. All of a sudden, here we go. We had the sightings take off. So I think radar was the initial impetus, and then the nukes came after that. And then now you have this spike that Kevin Knuth just briefed us all on last week or Saturday. You had this spike in attention. So it's the rise of our technology, but it's technology that we're reverse engineering from them. And so this is, if you look at the latest Star Trek franchise, it's all about, they lay that out as the reason behind the Prime Directive, or General Order 1 was the predecessor, whatever you want to call it. So in my mind, that's what makes sense. And that's why Lou Elizondo is still alive. Dave Grush is still alive. Jay Stratton is still alive. I'm still alive. Jay Barber is still alive. All these folks that have blown the whistle we are now letting them live because we have started to realize what you just said. A, we can handle it. The Robertson panel was misguided, but they were just doing the best they could with their understanding, especially with religious overtones on top of things and so forth in the late 40s. And the psychology of the 1947 American citizen was, yeah, maybe they couldn't. Maybe they couldn't handle it. You know, maybe we're the equivalent of children at that point. And so I use the analogy of if you had a child molester move in across the street to your household, do you tell all your kids that? I use the example of my kids asking me, can I shovel their driveway? Yeah, everybody except Mr. Smith on the corner. That's the child molester. I don't tell you that because we don't want to live in fear.
I tell them.
Right? Well, maybe you would, but I wouldn't. I would argue that you may be an anomaly, but the vast majority of parents wouldn't tell them because we want to keep it. So it's important to entertain the way other people think, right? That's what psychology is all about. So my argument is that in the 40s, we were like the parents that wouldn't tell them. They can't handle the truth. I think the vast majority of humans, not just American society, but human society across the globe, thanks to the internet and thanks to your efforts and folks like you, we are now much more like you as a parent, where we're like, yeah, I should tell them. Just like
it's all in the delivery.
A lot's in the delivery, but there's also the core of the message, right? Look, Santa Claus, sorry, kids, right? So we are teaching our kids from 3 years old, when they can first have formative memories, to lie.
Yeah, we're creating false realities.
We lie to them about the great pumpkin, the tooth fairy, Santa Claus, and so then we expect them to trust us afterward, right? And so that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I can connect all the dots, is that the folks in charge of the cover-up thought we couldn't handle it, and now they're begrudgingly admitting that maybe we can, for two reasons. Number one, they can now say that we have reverse engineered some of these guys, and we can shoot some of them down. Can't get all of them. No police force can interdict every narco-terrorist, to use your scenario, that I'm jumping the shark here a little bit, saying those were narco-terrorists that came in and killed us. You can't get them all, but we can get a lot of them. And so now there is a deterrent that some of them are talking to the other ones, yeah, go hit somebody else, right? Stay away from Bradenton, because they got maybe the Iron Dome or what Reagan called SDI. And there's a lot of, this literature that says SDI was a cover for an anti-ET weapon, right? That maybe that's where a lot of that money started to come in. And that also connects the dots for me as a DARPA program manager with a $170 million portfolio at one point. Actually, about $130 million. And then my SAP got canceled. And so I chopped that in half. That's another convoluted story. But in any case, that also explains to me how you can get financially responsible people to do that, to charge the American taxpayer dollar $3,000 for a canteen, right? Because, $2,990 of that are going to the black budget to fund this reverse engineering program, right? So that you can defend.
Canteen, though.
What's that?
It's a good-looking canteen.
That is. Yeah, I love that, man. That is fabulous. Yeah. And talk about open-mindedness, right? That captures.
Absolutely. Well, let's do this. Let's pause for a minute. I want to come back and close out, but I'm dying for a bio break here. So
let's do it.
You need to take a quick break. We'll come back and close it out. You had started to go down another path and introducing another character to this conversation. Do you want to maybe continue off with that?
Are you talking about John Brandenburg?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll close it up real quick. What John Brandenburg established is that through the ratio of xenon 129 to 132, that as he was doing his analysis of this landing site on Mars, he saw the spectrographic analysis and saw that that isotope ratio being around 2.5. So that is to say that the concentration of xenon 132 to 129 was 2.5, I think. And that was crazily anomalous, and he couldn't understand it. And there was another guy, and so he asked a weapons guy, and the guy said, oh, somebody nuked him. And then, so our eyes got big, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, to take John's long book short, very compelling evidence. There's only two ways you can get that ratio anywhere in nature. One is a supernova, which would have destroyed our entire solar system. And the other is a nuclear weapon. Not any nuclear weapon, a hydrogen bomb, a huge hydrogen bomb. And so he backs off from that, along with the evidence of pyramids, the very prominent evidence of pyramids that arguably has been covered up by NASA and obfuscated just like the rest of this, as well as other artifacts, and we talked a little bit about artifacts offline, to suggest that one super advanced species eliminated another lower level species on Mars many millions of years ago. So we've only been on this planet anywhere between 10,000 and 50,000 years. So it is not just possible, but probable that we have had many versions of humanity. There you go. So those are the two regions so also thorium's another really important aspect of this. So I guess I would just suggest to you and your readers to go read John Brandenburg's thing. But I bring that up as evidence that they ain't all good guys. That there are outlaws in the Galactic Society, just like we got outlaws in our society. And there is evidence that some of the ETs, the ones wearing the masks, who are removing the implants from us that others have put in, that they don't necessarily agree. It might be like the UN coming in and interdicting our helicopter as we are tagging those polar bears and saying, you guys knock that off. We are on Happy Bunny. We're not going to do this anymore because we need to show our fellow Galactic Society members that we are worthy of being brought in there. So that closes that out. To get to the main objective, my main objective, and it's on my website. And the name of my website is Fear Fighter. I want to fight the fear. I don't agree with the fear. And the worst way to fight fear is the example I just used, is to pretend that there's no reason to, right? I am in your camp after playing devil's advocate. I am in your camp about telling your kids that there's a child molester over there. Now, at what age, that still remains to be seen, right? And that's why I brought up the age of society. We were in elementary school back when the H.G. Wells thing went about. Mm-hmm. So maybe we couldn't have handled it then. But at some point, as your kids grow up and leave the nest at 18, society considers them adults, they're going to find out anyway. So maybe we ought to get ahead of it. And I think that's the position. If you take global society, humanity as a maturing human, I kind of think that's where we are. We are these renegade teenagers. We think we know it all now because we have the internet. You can't constrain us anymore. We're going to find out. Now, we're going to find out some BS along the way with that. We have to discriminate. I think that's where we are as a society. And so I do not agree with the approach of just keep yourself in a warm cocoon, that there's nothing to worry about.
Take the blue pill, right?
Yeah. I want to take the MMA fighter. I want to take fear by the neck and choke it out. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's what I'm trying to do. And I think that there is reason to have fear of galactic criminals. And part of the cover-up, the deepest part of the cover-up, is the strong evidence of human mutilation. That there is evidence that there are some of them that are not just less than benevolent. I would claim that, I have this sort of scale of full benevolence, which would be God, I guess, et cetera, to full malevolence, which is we're to be eradicated, just like we do with locusts. We're pests to be eradicated because nothing good can come out of that. Now we're starting to realize that that's not necessarily true, and we're realizing that we're eradicating the insects from this planet, and they have a very valuable function. Look at honeybees, that sort of thing. So I use that a lot. So to wrap that up, I think the government needs to share that evidence of the fact that we have been raped on occasion. There have been egregious murders like Hannibal Lecter sorts of things. But I think we can handle it. When that movie Hannibal Lecter came out, right, or Silence of the Lambs came out, society didn't, collapse. Just like society won't collapse from War of the Worlds. But in order to deal with fear, you got to confront it. You got to quit hiding it. And that's where I'm in vigorous agreement with you. Our government, all governments, got to come clean and just admit it. And now what makes it easier for them to do, and that's why I think they're heading towards that, is it's kind of like my dad showing me where he keeps his .44 Magnum. But he didn't do that until I was a relative adult, I guess, 14, 15, right? You're in that preteen area. I'm going to be gone in 2 years anyway. You might as well get ahead of it, And so I think that's where we need to be, and that's sort of the focus of my book.
Nice, love it. Yeah, I want to get into your book, but right before we close out, potentially, just so you can just let us know just a little bit more about it. But I guess in terms of DARPA, you worked within DARPA, and so if you could just let people know what that is, and then your thoughts on the phenomenon and your thoughts on disclosure and what's real and what's really happened to people and abductions and the craft and everything else. Your understanding of the phenomenon in totality. How much of that has come from outside of DARPA, and outside of your military career, or has any of your knowledge and understanding of the phenomenon come from anything that you've worked on personally, specifically within, connections to the program or whatever, so to speak?
Yeah, so, a lot of this is complicated, kind of like the knot and how to untangle it, but I'm going to be very succinct answer to that before I start getting into the complicated stuff and say no. There is nothing that I can directly attribute to this phenomenon. I've never been read in on any programs, but that doesn't mean that I don't have evidence. I've never seen the flames, but I have felt the heat, and I've smelled a lot of smoke. And so I can talk about some of that smoke if you'd like. Is that what? Yeah. So some of the smoke for me is the training that I didn't receive to become a DARPA program manager. The rest, every other advanced technology laboratory in the Department of Defense, whether it's the Air Force Research Lab that I served at much later, I never thought I would end up there. The Army Research Lab, the Navy Research Lab, the Office of Naval Research, all of these other entities, Air Force Office of Research, whatever. There are all these other entities within the government that do advanced research and advanced weapons development. But in order to become a program manager, have project managers, which is at a low level. You might get a a few $1,000,000 as a project manager to handle, because managers handle money primarily, and commanders command people. And I always use I don't like the term always, but I like to use the term or the phrase that commanders pull while managers push, right? So you push money around, but you pull your troops in the direction that you want them to go. So you accept the risk first. I talk a lot about risk. Ryan and I were talking about risk as an expression of love. So while I was on my intake into DARPA was resisted by the Army. The Army says, no, we don't, if we put somebody into an acquisition, a research and development position, they have to go to a 6-month course to learn, how to select contracts, what you can and cannot commit the United States government to pay for. There's a lot of this bureaucracy and regulations and so forth. And so I kind of complained to my boss when I first got there, hey, sir, I'm all about taking over this robotics program, but, I'm a kind of a combat guy, right? That's my background. I don't know about who's warranted as a contracts officer or any of the rest of that. Don't worry about it. This is on-the-job training. Just get at it. All right? So you dive. It is literally, you're throwing me into the water, and I got to figure out how to keep my head above the water. And that is very, very unique. There is no other organization anywhere, at least during the Cold War, that did that. You had this onerous training that you had to go up. So that was a data point. That is smoke. And then shortly after that, I picked up a book that I had started reading called The Day After Roswell, written by Philip J. Corso, that you may be familiar with.
I'm familiar with the book, yeah. It's fantastic.
And so I started rereading it, and it made me wonder, where did Corso's nut file go? He ended up, basically taking that stuff and seeding it throughout all these defense contractors. And then I had my first seedling program approved. So at DARPA, during this is the Cold War, 90s, we would ask for, and you had to compete for it, you had to give a compelling reason for it, and it was the equivalent of internal research and development funding that each office had. So they would dole that out at about $250 million, or $250,000. So you get $250,000 here and there for a research project. Usually it's about $100 million or $100,000. So it's just, and the idea is you're going to grow that into a full program. So it's to explore. And then I'm like, holy crap. Here's another data point, because Corso talked about distributing this stuff as seedlings, right? So 2 data points. And then I made the mistake of bringing a copy of that book to a Halloween party, and I dressed up in camouflage. No, it wasn't a Halloween party. It was a St. Patrick's Day party. But I treated it like Halloween. So I put on all my man makeup, right, my camouflage, and, I was always dressed in civilian clothes at DARPA. Rarely did I ever put on a uniform. But this time I put on my combat uniform, right? And so I show up, and everybody got a chuckle of it. And then there was was in the days when you could still get away with some liquor in the work environment then. And so I got hammered. I ended up sleeping in my office that night. But I brought that book in, and that's when I first ran headlong into scientism. Now, there are good scientists that are still guilty of scientism, but that came out big time. And I was surprised at the vigor with which they dismissed it all. But I realized, after I started, the contracts were awarded and so forth, I didn't have to go through the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR. Everybody else did. DARPA had an exception to the far. And we used it, and we were way more agile. And so I could cancel a contract left and right just at my whim. Now I had to justify it to my boss, and depending on the magnitude, if it was I think it was like $10 million. If it was a $10 million project, then he would have to get the directors, the escalation. So I had this enormous agility to hire and fire and do whatever I wanted, pretty much, that nobody at a lieutenant colonel level in any of the other research areas had anywhere close to. It was a level of responsibility that was unheard of. And that's why a lot of those organizations hated DARPA. And that's why it was a career killer for a lot of DARPA program managers. Just like Special Forces in the early days. It was not a career-enhancing field because everybody was jealous of SF because they had all the attention, blah, 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 the Gabriel teams that JFK had and so forth. So, again, a lot of smoke there, but no flames. I did have a special access program that I really, really needed because I had really stepped on it. I told a joke without it being approved by the management chain at a huge conference. DARPA Tech had this conference every year, and it really pissed me off. Another bit of smoke. Here's this organization that Eisenhower stood up in response to Sputnik to pursue technological surprise, and we're having a conference every year? I'm like, what the hell is this? Talk about secrecy, right? If we're supposed to get a technological advantage over all of our adversaries, and we're not classifying any of this, we're just broadcasting. It's kind of like in the commercial world, right? If you're just going to you're not going to patent anything. You're just going to, now, utopia, that's where we want to get to, right? That's for the benefit of all. But at this point, we're in a Cold War against Russia, and we are advertising to Russia, well, instead of gallium arsenide for the basis of our computer chips, we're going to invest in this. And so I wrote a note to myself, invest in XYZ, right? And send it to Iran, or whatever the enemy du jour is, right? And so that didn't make sense to me either. Why the hell do we got to do this? And so all of this, when I'm reading Corso's book, I'm like, holy crap, that's how DARPA got founded. They used Sputnik as an excuse, but we are going to prevent technological surprise by reverse engineering this stuff, and we're going to do it with no bid contracts, and we're just going to, and this is where Lou has come out as part of his rationale to blow the whistle on this, because these guys, they are not using a competitive process. They have a big, and once you get that edge, once you got what Corso specifically said was that he gave the angel hair, the fiber optic, to one company. He gave the radar absorbed material to another company, Lockheed, whatever. And these guys, once they had that and they exploited it, nobody could catch up to them because it would take 3 or 4 years of internal research and development to catch up. So it's the anathema of free market enterprise. It is the direct contravention to what the United States was formulated on, the freedom, and all the rest of that stuff. So we're using a Soviet Union sort of mentality, no competition, we're just anointing you to go exploit this. So that's another thing that made me, in putting all the pieces to the puzzle together, how could you corrupt a warranted contracting officer to do that, knowing that this is in direct violation of what free market enterprise is all about? Had to be something big. Again, I think it's the fact that abductions were not preventable and that some of them ended up as horrific experiences beyond words. Matter of fact, Leonard Stringfield, Leonard Stringfield? Yeah. Very well respected. He published I think it was like a white paper called The Unspeakables. and he talked about these human mutilation cases. So anyway, that's as much as I. Now I did have a SAP at DARPA, and it was canceled. So I went from zero after telling this joke, and it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious, but because I didn't get it approved, I was on the blacklist, bad. And so what dug me out of that blacklist was a video of an octopus that was so well concealed. The diver that took the video, now a world famous god of cephalopod research of encrypsis, natural camouflage within species. As he's diving along and swimming along, this coral comes to life and it becomes an octopus and it freaks everybody out. I turned that video into a $70 million research program to reverse engineer cephalopods for camouflage for special forces guys. And so that existed for 2 months.
So you're reverse engineering aliens as well.
We were reverse engineering, and you're probably familiar with that. There is a peer-reviewed paper from the UK that claims that cephalopods did not originate on this planet because the 70% offloading of their. So that program disappeared, and that made me real. That's another bit of smoke, because I think there was a super black project. I had all sorts of clearances, but there was another compartment that was already doing it, and they probably took that $70 million that I got approved and sent it over to that other guy. Just like Jay Stratton revealed that happened to him. This other program squashed his. And that happened to me back in the year 2000 during the hanging Chad's election. So I thought it was a political thing. And then much later, 5 years later, kind of like Jay, I realized I don't think it was political at all. I think there was another compartment.
You mentioned Lou a couple of times, and
Luis Elizondo,
yeah, and I'd love to get him on the show at some point. But what were your thoughts on that image that he released that I guess wasn't completely vetted?
Yeah, I go ahead.
I mean, after that, of course, people had talked about him as a disinformation guy, and
they've been talking about him as disinformation from the get-go.
Since day one, yeah, of course. I mean, he's trained in counterintelligence, of course, but that releasing that image definitely got the UFO community on his back again, and you're trying to screw up this whole, disclosure thing and make the UFO thing look like it's a joke, and so I'm don't have an opinion on it, but I was just curious from your standpoint and knowing Lou, what you would say about that.
So I chased Lou down. Right after, so I told you the thing about being at the Air Force Academy, et cetera. And then I get disgusted and resigned my position. And on my terminal leave, I went out to, I had a boat out in San Diego, so I spent a lot of time out there, and I'm gonna go out there and finish my robotics book that's still under adoption review that I told you. And then I went up to TTSA, drove up the coast, and I'm gonna come in cold because I'm skeptical of this guy. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, all right. So I know that he had gone into the Army from Miami, where he grew up. And I knew, because he had watched every episode of Unidentified, both seasons, I think 8 episodes each season. And I was really curious, and I was super skeptical, because he comes into the Army as an enlisted guy. Now, he's got a degree, or he claims he has a degree. I've never seen it, in microbiology. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the guy that the Department of Defense is going to put in charge of investigating these crazy UFOs? I don't get that. You can't throw a rock in Washington, D.C. without hitting a retired jet jockey, right? And so if it had been David Fravor, I'm all about it. If it had been Ryan Graves, yeah. These guys, or Alex Dietrich, all of these folks have enormous experience flying our most advanced aircraft. What the hell is this guy with microbiology? What the hell is he doing in charge of this? And he was an enlisted guy. You know, that's no offense. I mean, look, it's just different jobs. That doesn't mean we're any smarter or better or whatever. But, you know, if you're going to start dealing with advanced physics, you probably ought to have an advanced degree or two. And I know a lot of these pilots end up going and getting PhDs in aeronautics, you know, the Travis Taylors of the world. If Travis Taylor had been presented as the guy, I'm all about it. Yeah, it makes no sense. I wouldn't have been skeptical. So an Army guy who doesn't fly anything, you know, Army aviators fly helicopters. And I got a bunch of buddies I just give every year, awesome guys. So he's not even have a pilot's license. What the hell is going on? So I figure I'm just going to roll up there, you know, cold call, unannounced, and just see how it goes. Because I love the messaging and everything it was about. It's clear that he took a big risk to himself, and I loved all that. But I got all these unaddressed issues in the back of my head. So I show up. Nobody there. Well, there were a few people there. Steve Justice was there. Tom DeLonge wasn't on site. And I'm wandering around, and I had heard, you know, it said to the Stars Academy. So an academy, to me, I'm expecting an academic sort of building, you know, with a few classrooms, you know, maybe a arboretum or something, you know, maybe a little cafeteria. None of that. It was a music studio that had been converted, you know, for Tom DeLonge's, you know, rock and roll stuff, which is great. Which is an interesting connection between him and Jake Barber, by the way, because Jake Barber is a phenomenal musician. Talks a little bit about that, but I'll resist that temptation to open that up. So I go track down Lou. He's not there. He's out filming. But I meet with, I offer to take these guys to lunch, and I buy them lunch so that I can ask them what I can do to help them, because I love what they're doing. And it was weird. It turned out to be like an ad hoc job interview, because they were investing in AI, and they're going to bring an AI guy on, and they wanted like a large database AI guy, you know, data mining kind of guy, to throw at all this data that they were getting out. Not a control guy about robots and everything. So that was a misfit. And I just went off and never heard, you know, never followed it up. So shortly after that, Lou and Chris Mellon resigned from TTSA, and, you know, I'm shocked like the rest of the world. So I'm just kind of, you know, still following it up. And then I saw the final episode of Unidentified on the History Channel, featuring none other than Mario Woods, Jeff Goodrich, Robert Hastings, Bob Jacobs. Terry Lovelace doesn't appear, which is interesting to me, because these had become my little new brotherhood. And I remember just being furious that after Mario's interview, they brought Susan Clancy in as like the expert on abductions, because she wrote. So John Mack wrote 3 books on the abduction phenomenon, plus published many papers. Susan Clancy's book is about that big, and it was a very lame attempt to refute John Mack. And it has been trashed throughout both the scientific world and the rest of the world. And so I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing? They put John Mack's picture up, kind of like Ryan would do, right? And then they just dismiss him because he's dead now. So they bring her on, and they allow her to sort of trash John Mack and to categorize Mario's and Jeff's and Robert's, both Roberts' experiences as it's simply a case of sleep paralysis. And I'm like, you mother, I can't believe you did that. And so I call Lou. I think I got his number from Robert Hastings. We had a couple of chats, and so we were on pretty good terms. But on this call, I ripped him a new one. I was like, dude, what are you doing? You are throwing, well, first of all, I had resolved myself after talking to him. He is a brilliant man. And now I get why they put him in charge of this. Because A, he's an outsider. You don't want an aviator coming into this with all the preconceived notions. So it was a mechanism to get a fresh view on it, which was a great idea. And once you talk to him, I mean, very sharp, really, and he comes across very well. So I've finally resolved that. You know, I'm over that little hump. That's why they would put him in charge of this. But I can't deny that maybe there's a misinformation component of this because he's very slick about that. But he's just a genuinely good guy. But here's what happened. I call him and I'm like, and he goes, dude, I can't tell you how much anguish I have over this because I don't have control over the editorial process, right? Just like I don't sitting here. You guys can make me look like an idiot. You don't. You are really good at making knuckleheads look great, right? And so I love that about you. And this is real. And Jesse does the same thing. And so, again, my hat's off to you as part of that compassionate, science. So I ripped him a new one over Mario. And he goes, well, look, first of all, we didn't have content control. Secondly, we had to present a non-biased situation. And I was like, you didn't? He goes, what do you mean? I go, it was not non-biased. You gave the prosecution a lawyer and put her on stage, and you didn't have a defense lawyer for our guys. There was nobody to defend Mario's status, to push back against this ridiculous sleep paralysis claim. And all you did was put John Mack's picture up. So you put our guy in a courtroom without a lawyer. He goes, all right, I think I get it. I'll call you right back. And so he hangs up. And I'm like, all right, maybe I was wrong about this guy. Maybe he is a misinformation guy. The next person to call me, Mario Woods. He goes, hey, brother, you are not going to believe who just called me. I go, yeah, it was Lou Elizondo, wasn't it? He goes, what? How'd you know? I go, dude, I just ripped him a new one. And so what Lou did immediately, he called Mario before calling me back, and he said, I want to apologize to you on behalf of not just me personally, but the entire United States government for how you have been mistreated. And I was a part of that, and I want to apologize to you directly. And that's the kind of guy Lou Elizondo is. And so anybody that has these suspicions, I'm going to offer that up to you. Now, he may still be peddling some stuff as part of this, this other approach that we can't handle at all. And so this is what's great about, brothers in arms, is we can disagree and still be friends. Wouldn't that be great for our political world to sort of embrace that? So Lou knows that I disagree with this catastrophic disclosure thing. I think it's crap. I think that is a load of bunk that is the very stink of the rotten vegetables that he talks about. He talks about a lot about how we got to let this secret out because it's not like fine wine. It's going to age like vegetables rotting in your fridge. But then he and Carl Nell and a couple of my other friends, and I love these guys, but I vehemently disagree with them, that it is way time. You've had 80 years to roll this out the slow way. You've had 80 years to open the kimono, and you're kind of like, here, just let the rest out for crying out. We are pregnant with expectation, and that's why I love Jake Barber's quote. And I've told him I'm going to quote him and steal his phrase, where he said, I don't believe it's going to be ontological shock. I believe it's going to be ontological relief. And I think you and I, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's exactly what we're both talking about. That it is going to be a relief to society.
Yeah.
We know we can smell those vegetables.
Right.
So quit trying to close it.
There might be a day or two, or a week or two, or a year or two, or what, a decade even, who knows, where, they played that video in New Jersey that you alluded to, the radio broadcast.
Yeah, H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, yeah.
And people are freaking out. And that might happen initially, right when the news comes out, right when it's disclosed, right when, that comes out. But then we rebound, we get over it, we
Absolutely.
move on, we continue on with life. We figure out how to incorporate that reality into our, however we need to incorporate it. But
that's why I use that galactic veterinarian.
Yeah.
Say, I talk about abducting my Labrador Retriever. It is painful initially, but you eventually end up much better off, right? Because they gotta wiggle that leg around to cause the pain to know where the problem is. But then once the procedure's done, once the Komodo's open, I think society's going to be much better off.
For sure, 100%. And we always are when we know what the truth is. But,
Yeah.
But what is disclosure then? I mean, disclosure, the word itself is so like we really need a government official to tell us what's real. I mean, we kind of do so that we agree upon it, but it's so frustrating at the same time, that's what it's going to take. And then even when that does occur, you're still going to have people that just, no, it doesn't fit into my belief system. It's not it's not a part of my reality, no matter what my president says, or because it's a different president from a different party, or what is that disclosure going to look like? Or maybe an even better question, what does disclosure have to look like in order for it to be accepted globally as a new reality?
I got to tell you, Matt, this is my 25th podcast interview on this subject. I've had a bunch of others on rescue robotics and so forth. Nobody's asked me that question. And I've seen them ask other people around the table and so forth, and I really want to chime in, but I want to be respectful and not interrupt people, because we do that all the time, right, when we're doing this. And that's another thing that I love about your format here. I've got to commiserate with Jake and Dave Grush and Lou to a certain extent with their frustration over our government and their intentional naivete of, again, I don't see any evidence. Well, you're not frickin' looking for it. And for you to not look for it, that is incompetence, and you should be fired for your job. If you're not all the other senators and congressmen that have been ignoring this and haven't done the deep dive in. So this, I'm gonna throw, and I never thought I would do this, with a congressman or a senator, right? Because of there's absolute blatant corruption with people benefiting from insider trading of the stocks. Well, I still don't understand how our government can't prevent people from buying stock if you're a member of Congress. That is a direct conflict of interest. But I will resist the temptation to go down that hole and just say that the courage that those government members on both sides of the schism that we have that keeps getting wider, the courage that those folks have taken, the risk that they've taken to their career, that is blatant courage. And so I want to put them all on a pedestal for it. But for every one of them, there are 100 who are voluntarily refusing to look into it. And that is a mixture of cowardice and incompetence, because this is the most important thing that we are doing right now, without a doubt, right? And again, my hat's off to you. But I've gotta agree with all the other guys and Jay, because Jay, reading between the lines, and I don't want to put words in his mouth because he didn't say this directly, but I think he is also frustrated with government. And so I don't think disclosure is going to be a government official admitting it. I think it's going to be, they are going to have all governments across the entire globe are going to have their dog's nose rubbed in their own poop. That's the way I think it's going to happen. So I think, this is a worldview that has evolved rapidly over the last 2 or 3 years, especially after meeting Jake and everything that's occurred since then. What disclosure looks like to me are multiple species representatives, 9, 10, maybe 20 of them, of a wide variety of different species standing on stages around the globe in every country, every big city, as representatives, some in uniform, some without, whatever. And they are suddenly there, and all around the globe, people can walk up and touch them. They probably have some sort of advanced technology where they can, anticipate potential violence against them, and the force field will run up, and the bullets will stop short or whatever. That's what disclosure looks like to me. I don't think anybody is going to come clean because of the ego issues that we already talked about. It is so difficult for people to admit their mistakes. And our trend is not going in that direction. Our trend is going in the opposite direction. Where here in the United States, everybody's blaming somebody else. Look at the spat that we got between our president and this billionaire right now, and they are looking at us, we're acting like children on the flippin' playground. And it's not just them, Democrats are doing the same thing. Everybody is doing this playground behavior rather than trying to convince them that we're worthy of this and treating each other with respect and respectful dialogue. Instead of calling, as soon as, my dad told me this one time. He said, if you ever get in a debate and somebody starts calling you names, you have won the debate. Because you just got under they have become so desperate that they can't present a logical counter to what you're saying, that they got to resort to that. And we see that all the time now.
All the time.
It's an act of intellectual cowardice. If you have to resort to calling somebody a name, you're conceding the argument because you got nothing to contribute. That's what disclosure looks like to me.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. It's like, it's a big step to get to aliens on stage with and I get that. That's, I feel like that's like part 2 or part 3 or something. It feels like, or part 5, like part 1 feels like we have to show the world population that we have ships and that we have bodies. Like the human biologics, like where are those? And let's get them on camera, and let's, that'll be the first step to actually say, okay, we have these on camera. The next step would be to put them in a public place, which is guarded, of course, where people can come and look at them and say, these are real. We have bodies of non-terrestrial objects, and then to show people the ships. If we've been reverse engineering ships, if we have 9 of them at S4 or wherever the hell they are now, Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or whoever's working on them, like Congress has to get into those locations where we're keeping these ships and where we're keeping, I don't know if it's Congress, I don't know who the hell it is, but somebody within the government has to get in there and be like, look guys, we've got to let this out. We've got to tell people that you have this. And when that decision's made, it can happen very quickly. And then it's just that shock to the world, that shock to everybody's reality of, okay, this is real now. I have to factor this into what my version of reality. Like that might take some time for some people, and for some people it'll happen instantaneously, and they'll get it and they'll be okay with it. For some people there'll be a tremendous amount of resistance and just, this isn't real, and I don't believe these people because it doesn't fit into their reality. It's like the people that you're talking about earlier who are just unwilling to, won't go down that rabbit hole, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit into their reality, right?
Right.
And so that's why people, they can't believe it.
I typically like to be very optimistic and not pour cold water on it, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
I was in a meeting with Lou and Carl Nell and
showing craft and showing beings you don't think will happen.
No.
Okay.
Nope. I don't think any of that's going to happen.
How does disclosure happen without that?
Well, so I was in a meeting with these guys, and they kept arguing about how we have to avoid catastrophic disclosure. And again,
what is catastrophic disclosure?
Catastrophic disclosure is H.G. Wells. You come out and society collapses. We banks close, the stock market collapses because nobody respects our government because there's a higher power. Nobody respects the Pope anymore because there's a higher power than even our religions. Nobody respects the Maharaja. That all religions collapse because we realize that there's somebody's out there. Okay, so to push back against that, the Vatican has already come out in 2008 and said they have already gotten ahead of this. The Vatican astronomer, I think his name was Father Nunez, had broadcast to the world on behalf of the Pope that the Catholic Church no longer sees any, I shouldn't even say no longer, does not see any conflict between belief in Christ and belief in God and belief in other extraterrestrials. And what takes this off the table, every time I get into this argument, some of my best buddies are like, if somehow across the dinner table or over beers, it comes up, or we're watching, we're at a sports bar and Luis Elizondo comes up on the screen, or Chris Mellon or whatever, and it comes up. They're like, hey, bro, I'm a God guy. I'm like, yeah, so it's not binary, bro. I'm a God guy too.
I can identify with multiple things.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
so I don't agree with that. And here's the other thing. I'm in a little bit of a unique position, having been at 3 huge disasters that had the potential to cause societal collapse. You had Timothy McVeigh blow up the Murrah building, right? Domestic terrorism. Society didn't collapse. Oklahoma City didn't collapse. It congealed around that. You had to turn volunteers away. Same thing at the World Trade Center. I was there that night. Same thing. It wasn't a collapse. It was a call to unity. Same thing after Hurricane Katrina. I brought robots into New Orleans a couple of days after that. I saw the same thing. In every one of those scenarios, you had to turn the volunteers away. There were a few anomalies. The chief of police in New Orleans went home to take care of his own family, which is in direct violation of his oath, right? If everybody, and I know we say this a lot, family first. Well, if everybody treated their family first, who's putting out the fire, right? Who's taking down the narco-terrorists? So there's got to be a subset of society that puts family second in the middle of an emergency situation.
But what is the fear? Like, what does societal collapse really look like? I mean, society doesn't collapse until the power grid is turned off. That's when there's no more society.
I agree. That's my whole point.
Right. So there's going to be some rioting. Maybe there's going to be some people freaking out. There's going to be some people whose worldviews are shaken. It's like, who cares? Like, we get over that. We can deal with that. Like,
I agree.
That's 10 minutes.
So I used your example of that. There have been countless disasters just like that, not just the ones that I've been personally involved in, but countless other situations that we are a resilient species. So I push back against that. So in this meeting with Carl and Lou and some other folks, from the back of the room, and it was kind of fancy, and it was wonderful, and the guy that hosted was a wonderful guy. I blurted out right in the middle of them talking about this catastrophic disclosure notion, Boston Tea Party. I said we need a Boston Tea Party. And that's my version of the Boston Tea Party. They, the NHI, cause disclosure. They personally put themselves at risk all over the planet, on TV, all over the world. And there's going to be people that are going to say that's AI-generated nonsense to make us submit, right? But they don't. They just expose themselves as a means to spark this unity that we realized on 9/11. Wow, there's something bigger than me here. That you know. So, and in that same context, I'm going to mention false flag operations, because false flag operations are real. I think somebody's going to claim that this presence of all these different species is a false flag operation. But guess what? When they shut down all of our military activity after that for, 30, 40, 60 days, then pretty soon that starts to die out, right? It takes a while, like you said, for folks to load up, to realize, to adapt, to come to grips with it. And I've postulated this already. You know, the nuclear incursions that Bob Salas has heroically revealed, and Hastings and all the folks that Robert Hastings has brought into the limelight, those are just the overt ones. And in every one of those cases, as we talked about, as Mario described, that the big sphere, walnut-looking thing, beaming down into the LF, the launch facility, that's all very overt with what is arguably a very strong message. Quit playing with matchsticks. But how do we know that they didn't covertly, with the invisible guys, like the invisible guys in Vegas, shut them all down? How do we, I many times I discussed with some of my colleagues in the nuclear industry when I was in it. Couldn't wait to get out of it, by the way, because of there was so much negativity. And that's why I ended up going into hostage rescue by way of special forces. But anyway, how do we really know that they work? We have 2 detonations on record during wartime. We have multiple tests. But after that last test, and I don't even know when the last test was. Can Ryan look that up for us? I don't know. But I'm not sure that any of that stuff works. After Salas talks about how quickly every one of those 10 missiles in his flight were shut down, and then we have the same exact thing happening in Russia in both directions. They shut them down and they spin them up without any human getting ready to launch it. So I think that was a dual message. It was a dual message of you're playing with matchsticks, not just with nukes, but with AI. If you turn all this stuff over to automation, that automation can launch that stuff before you can interdict. So that was a dual message. And there's a much bigger overlap of the AI UAP areas that we can get into maybe after my book comes out, because that's another reason why I need to get my robot book out first, because it builds a case against autonomous weaponry and the dark side of AI for that. So that's why I think the NHI have probably already shut down all of our nukes. So after they're exposed, and you get, you're going to get the trolls saying, don't go for it. Don't believe it. It's a false flag. Well, why would they do a false flag all over the entire globe? That's why a global presence is critical. And secondly, okay, after 6 months, and nobody has launched a war against each other, not with nukes anyway. And there's spats, right? And so like you said, there's going to be turmoil and unrest and everything. But as long as the lights are still on, and as long as everybody can still feed themselves, there's going to be some disruption. But I don't think it's going to be the end of humanity. I don't think we're going to self-destruct on that, especially if they stick around for a while and make sure that the kids play nice in the playground. I think that's how it's going to go. And I don't think it's going to be too long. I think we are living in interesting times, and I am counting my lucky stars that I'm alive at this point on this planet at this time, because it is an absolutely fascinating study of behavior. As a behavioral scientist, I couldn't ask for a better, experiment to be involved in,
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's a great time to live. It's a great time to be here. There's so many fascinating things happening. At the same time, there's a lot that could be coming at us here in the near future that's, people that could be also a bit terrifying for people as well.
Yeah, but the statistics speak for themselves, like we talked about already. 99% of violent crime by 1%. That means 99% of us aren't doing murderous things. Right. I'm not packing. You like you said already, you don't need to go buy an assault gun at Walmart to walk across the street. Not in the U.S., not in the vast majority of this planet. Now, some places less secure than others, but the vast majority of us, fear is the enemy. Resist that urge to go run down to Walmart and get that freaking machine gun. You don't need it. The vast majority of us are good folks. And the few, misguided people in uniform that do have and misuse deadly force, try to put yourself in their shoes. That's all I can ask. That you gotta, compassion goes both ways. It's not just from law enforcement and military down, it's from us up towards them.
Well, hey, man, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. It's super enlightening. It's definitely really cool to get to know you. And Mario spoke super highly of you, and I see why he spoke so highly of you.
Same back at you, brother.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. And would love to have you back on at some point. I know you got some books coming on.
Sure, yeah.
But I think it could be a good future conversation as well that we could continue,
Absolutely. And thank you for your insight.
Yeah.
Extremely valuable.
Good.
And we need more of that across the world.
I agree.
This is how innovation happens, right? Is exchange, not compartments.
Right. And people, I think, are starting to get that. People get that, and they're not going to the mainstream news so much anymore as they are independent creators that are actually exploring ideas like this.
And that's what makes what you do so important.
Yeah.
Please keep doing it.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not stopping. Yeah, no, I'm having the best time of my life. It's been really cool.
Wonderful.
So any other kind of closing thoughts for you?
No, I think I've been flapping my gums enough.
Okay.
Thank you for the freedom to do that.
No doubt. No, I appreciate it. Great times. Great to get to know you. And thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan. That was magical.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Good stuff.